Welcome to the only place where real, raw, and vulnerable conversations happen with IFBB bikini pros to give you an inside look at their struggles, strategies, mindset, passions, and all of life beyond the stage. This podcast is made to inspire, motivate, and remind competitors and the average gym goer that even the most extreme lifestyles and elite athletes have their ups and downs. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm your host, Celeste Rains-Turk, and now it's time for the Confessions of a Bikini Pro podcast. Our fourth guest is David DeMesquita, who is a functional health coach on a mission to make lives better. Many know of him on Instagram as Dynamite D for his honest, down-to-earth word posts about bodybuilding, health, and business. For the past 8 years, he has helped people from a wide range of backgrounds to not just optimize internal systems, but also achieve their best physiques ever. He has worked with some of the top Olympians in the IFBB and continues to help athletes of all ages and experiences. His passion for hormones, autoimmune, and digestive issues stemmed from family and close friends that he witnessed struggling. And then David officially founded his coaching company, DeMesquita Nutrition, in 2021 after leaving a corporate IT position and building his knowledge from medical doctors and world-renowned practitioners. David has over 10 years of his own competitive bodybuilding experience, being coached directly by some of the best in the industry, including the late Matt Porter and John Meadows and Austin Stout. His love for the sport continues as he shares content on his YouTube channel with show predictions, division analysis, and honestly, you guys, so much more. I went down a rabbit hole when prepping for this episode, so this could be this is going to be a fun one. But outside of fitness, David enjoys playing video games and watching anime and doing weekend house projects or playing with his Bengal cats, Luke and Leia. And he and his wife, Caroline, who's expecting, which is so awesome. They reside in Atlanta, Georgia, not far from me, actually. So, David, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited. I've been seeing this podcast name float around a little bit with some of my athletes and in the hemisphere. So when you hit me up, I was pretty excited to come on here and hopefully enlighten some people on certain topics.
Yeah, I think it'll be awesome. And I'm excited to have you on because I, like you, have seen me floating around. I've seen you for years, the past few years, especially with your posts, as we mentioned in the bio. And I just think that you're bringing something important to the industry. It's not always so black or white. You do address more of that gray area, but I want to hear from you specifically, like how you would describe your coaching philosophy.
Yeah, so my coaching philosophy was developed actually based off myself being an athlete as well as my wife because, well, we weren't married at the time. We were girlfriend, boyfriend at the time, and we were long distance when we started. But she actually started getting coached by John, and when she moved down here, she had really bad hormone issues, even before John. So she didn't have a menstrual cycle for 2 years. So I started diving into some women's health stuff, and there was some family that I had too that had some menstrual cycle issues. So essentially what happened with my journey is I ended up getting gut dysbiosis all the way back when I was in college, probably my first year of lifting, actually. It put me in the hospital, put me in the hospital again. I kept getting dismissed with the IBS. And eventually I hit a point in my bodybuilding career where like I would get lockjaw. I literally physically could not eat because my bacterial overgrowth got so bad. And I had severe depression along the way from the leaky gut that I had. I had a leaky gut for almost a decade as well. So those are all things that really weren't talked about in the bodybuilding space, which are very prevalent from the amount of food that we eat, the high stress that we put ourselves into when we're competing. And then you go down the rabbit hole of pharmacology and endocrinology and biology. And these were all things that really weren't being talked about publicly. And I was talking about it just because there wasn't really good information out there, at least back then when I started. Now there's good resources out there that are talking more openly about the subject. It was very hush. It used to be on the forums way back in the day, and the only other forum that you had public really was bodybuilding.com, which was interesting to say the least. You'd get like a random Jay Cutler training program and try it out and see how that went, or use Arnold Schwarzenegger's book. So the information, the resources available when I first started are very different than what they are now. So that's why I started down the educational route. And when I started going down that route and I started getting more into the medical space, I started shadowing under some doctors. For instance, one of the doctors that I actually learned my fertility protocol from was a urologist. I only had to see like one penis that he did surgery on before I stopped shadowing him. But I was like, that was like one too many for me. Like I have to see mine on daily, and I don't really need to see mine. What it is. Um, so shadowing under doctors was huge for me and some of the top scientists in the world as well. So it's not just doctors that interests me. It's how do all these systems interchange and work together? In the bodybuilding space, everyone jumps into like PEDs and they don't even know the first fundamental root of like why are you even taking a PED? Like why are you taking I don't shouldn't say the word drug, but I'm gonna say it anyways. But why are you taking a drug when you haven't even optimized things at a natural level? Like what can you do before you start deteriorating your health? Or are there drugs that can cause longevity purposes behind it? Because in the bodybuilding space, everyone talks about bodybuilding and longevity. Bodybuilding, competing is not longevity. In fact, building muscle tissue is the opposite of longevity. Yes, muscle is great for us for longevity, but building muscle tissue to be a competitive bodybuilder is not, because inflammation is great for building muscle tissue and building great physiques and recovering from your workout. But you know what's not good for longevity? Inflammation. So it's like the opposite of what we want. All these people talk about taking things like growth hormone and being great for hair, skin, nails, but they don't talk about that cell proliferation happens from the IGF-1 tail life, which is the piece that we want for bodybuilding. But what does that do? It can also replicate tumor cells and cancer growth. So these are all things that like it's that double-edged sword that no one really was talking about, and it just brought so many more questions. When I got an answer, there would be 5 to 10 different words in a scientific article that I would want to go down a rabbit hole of. And that's really what put me down the route of coaching. And I thought that things could be done better. Not that things were being done wrong, but what can we do better? And just being open-minded. And I think the moment that you close your mind off is the moment that you stop living, because we can learn something from every single person that we meet on this planet. It doesn't matter who they are. They could be homeless on the side of the road. And I guarantee you I can learn something very important from them.
Totally, absolutely agree. And I love that breakdown of your philosophy and how it evolved with your own time in the industry and outside of the industry and noticing what was necessary. I find it interesting that you say that bodybuilding isn't for longevity because as a bikini competitor, I'm like, really? Like, I feel like it could be. But then again, I also agree with you that there are certain approaches that are not optimal for that. And like from my mental health perspective, my goal is to help people have longevity in the sport for the time that they're in the sport based on the approach that they're taking and how it's affecting them mentally. I think that has such a big role in how long someone can be in it. So when you say, how do you optimize this? What does that actually mean to you?
Let's talk about bikini really fast, because I do agree with you. I think bikini probably has the lower muscularity divisions have better longevity in them. And it doesn't just have to do with PEDs, because you can be very genetically blessed and naturally more muscular and fall into a bigger division, which is what's supposed to happen. You either fall into a smaller division or a bigger division genetically, and that's where you should fall. And then you don't go against the grain, you go with your genetics, not against them. And that creates longevity, because that's where your body's supposed to be. It's kind of like when you're a kid, like your son, if they were like wrestling down a division, why don't you just wrestle them up a division? Keep cutting back down that weight, and you're going to affect their puberty, their actual natural growth. Don't do that. Just let them naturally grow. So there are some aspects to just basic endocrinology for like women, for instance, where you can optimize hormones. And we're talking a monthly basis, because you guys are supposed to have, in parentheses, 28-day cycles. Not every woman's on a 28-day menstrual cycle, by the way. It could be 28 days followed by 32 and then in 28 again. And that's your normal cycle, you know? So everyone says like, you need 28 days. It's not always true. Usually, quote unquote, in a hippie thing, it aligns to the moons, because every 14 days you're having basically a half moon and a full moon, and it aligns to your menstrual cycle. So something like that is a great way to track. And you have things like the Aura ring and stuff. So making sure that your estrogen levels aren't raising too high and your progesterone levels are just high enough and you're not having big mood swings before your period. Those are all biofeedback indicators from a coaching standpoint that can really help someone to not only feel better in the day in the life, but also optimize performance too. One of the beautiful things that women have is tons of estrogen, which are phenomenal for neurotransmitters. So your brain and how well your brain's functioning. It's good for hair, skin, nails. That's why women don't go bald and men go bald over time. It's not just testosterone. Estrogen's really good for hair. And those are just things that aren't heavily prefaced because it's quote unquote okay to not have a menstrual cycle while you're prepping because you're lean. It usually doesn't have to do with how lean you are. It usually has to do with hormone optimization. Sometimes, yes, because estrogen does predominantly store in fat, but estrogen stores other places as well. And it's usually a lack of micronutrition and taking a proper off season, taking the time off and stress management. You might not be able to go to the gym and train 5, 6 days a week as a woman. You might only be able to go to the gym 2, 3 days a week, and that's perfectly fine. As long as you're in a caloric deficit and you're getting lean enough for the show, that's what matters. You don't have to be bone peeled and have feathered glutes. You're not supposed to. You need to be lean, don't get me wrong. I say that bikini athletes do still need to be peeled, but it's a different kind of peeled, like you do need to be close to 8% body fat if you're going to be on a pro stage. But you're also probably eating a lot more food. My bikini athletes eat way more food than my bodybuilders. My bodybuilders are starving compared to most of my bikini athletes. So it's actually funny. Someone asked me, how much is the lowest amount of food I've ever given a woman? And I had to think on it. And I actually had to run the numbers on the macros that I was giving them. And it was almost 1,200 calories with 2 refeeds a week. And that was the lowest that I ever got someone. And that's not saying that there's not going to be someone that I eventually have that's lower than that. But that was the lowest at that moment in time in my coaching career that I had someone. And I'd probably say it actually went up because you also have thyroid issues that come into play, which naturally happen during competing. And when you diet down and you're chronically dieting, and this is very prevalent in the bikini world, when you're chronically dieting year round, it down regulates your thyroid. You're gonna, on paper, probably be hypothyroidism, right? That's the medical diagnosis, prognosis that you're gonna hear all the time just thrown out. You hear teenage girls being diagnosed with hypothyroidism. And all that means is you're probably overly stressed and you fix the stress and things are going to come to fruition. Or B, you're just under eating for such a long period of time that your metabolism's down regulating. It's like if we were out in the wild and we had no food available to us, what would happen? Our body would not want more food because we're literally going to waste away and die. So it's going to down regulate. It's called metabolic adaptation. It's not like metabolic dysfunction is another terminology thrown around there. But you also had metabolic damage, which metabolic damage is not a medical terminology. So those are all things that are like thrown in the space that used to be used in the marketing space. But that stuff that happens, and it does take time to reverse that out. So stepping on the brake and stepping on the gas pedal is very important, especially for women, because stress hits women like a dump truck. I'm sorry, but like a physical stress load on a woman is completely different than physical stress load on a man. We are built differently, and that's all there is to it. And a lot of it has to do with like hormones more than anything else.
That's super insightful as well. And I can say from my own experience and journey as an athlete, I saw this play out. Like I kind of fell into that. Well, you're an athlete, so it's normal category. And then I was like, this doesn't seem normal. And I finally got with my coach now who actually resolved that period issue where I didn't have a menstrual cycle. And I had it all the way through my prep, even into North Americans, which was like my best look ever. And I only lost it that month before. And then it was back. And I was like, okay, so it's not about how lean I am but that was a nice excuse for a while. But we didn't look at everything else, at that point in time. So I like how you broke that down. And you also said that it could be a lack of micros. It could be stress management. It could be not necessarily leanness, but the chronic dieting. And so then I think, okay, well, 70%, if that number might be higher now, 70% of females report disordered eating even from a young age. So if you get a preteen who's already fallen into disordered eating and then they get into the fitness world and that helps potentially because now maybe they're eating more or they're not, but they're like, oh, competing looks awesome. And now some coach just puts them on a prep diet instead of building them up. Now you're looking at an even longer dieting phase without even considering, wait, this girl's been doing this to herself since she was young, and now we're perpetuating it further. So how do you take someone who has disregarded the importance of a menstrual cycle and convince them that it's worth working to get it back, and why is that even important anyways?
That's a really good question. You brought up a lot of really good points. So let me talk about eating disorders really fast. And adolescence, when women are in their teens and going through puberty, because you guys start way sooner than men, or even traumatic backgrounds, abusive backgrounds, or sexual harassment, all this stuff that causes severe trauma to the brain or growth within your pubescent years are the hardest cases that I see. Not most are resolvable. Almost every single case is resolvable naturally without medical intervention. Sometimes medical intervention will just help a situation so they feel better during that process. Because you don't want to be clinically insane and feeling like you're going through menopause when you're in your 20s. There's no point for that. There's plenty of stuff that we have out there now and knowledge. So that was one thing I did want to just kind of like briefly talk about was it's resolvable. Those cases are much more difficult. And then we get into, you're talking about certain habit forming things. And one thing I don't like about the coaching space that I don't do is I don't take weight check-ins every single day. People become obsessive with the data and obsessive with the scale. And I'll use a study that was just recently done on constant blood glucose monitoring, where they were just hooking people up to CGM machines. And what they found is they were becoming so obsessed with trying to get their blood glucose to stay within a certain range that they were doing the polar opposite of what the experiment was supposed to do. So I can't remember if they put on weight or what it was, but their blood glucose was thrown all over the place because they're constantly stressing about their blood glucose. And what does cortisol do? It inhibits insulin. So your blood glucose is going to start getting driven up. So that was just like one example where getting obsessed with the data makes things worse. The whole key is allowing the athlete to turn off their brain and trust the process. Hopefully you hired the right person so that you can trust the process enough. And I think that that's where great coaching comes in versus good coaching is understanding the psychology of the person and allowing them to be able to trust you. And if they're losing trust, allowing them to be able to trust you to confide in you about their problems and speak to their problems. You have to build up that relationship. Trust is earned, not given, in my opinion. I know that a lot of people, like, they go to a coach thinking that they can trust them and they never build up trust with that person. They never have communication with that person, or they start communicating with them and they stop communicating with them because don't feel like they're being heard. If you don't feel like you're being heard, express that to your coach. They're there hopefully because they love it and not the money. I'm here because I'm coming from an IT background. I didn't need to be coaching, but I'm here because I love it. And because John passed away and I wanted to go and create a social media platform that was helpful to other people, because it's about helping people and making lives better simplistically. That's all that coaching is, to make lives better. Because the externals of the sport are way more difficult than the internals of the sport. Being an athlete, going to the gym 3-4 days a week is not really that hard. Making your meals and eating your meals 4 or 5 times a day is not really hard. If you think that's hard, then life hasn't hit you like a dump truck yet, and you've got a lot more life to experience. But that's not that hard to do. But controlling your stress levels, your relationship, all those things when you're getting depleted down, that's where it gets hard. So I don't know if I covered that question or not, but you brought up the eating disorder thing, and I wanted to talk about that because it's extremely important that I do clear the air on that those cases are the most extreme cases, and you have to be very cautious with how you approach them and not constantly making them track everything. Sometimes not tracking weight at all. Look at their pictures. Look, have them track their blood glucose and their blood pressure. See what's going on there. Women don't track their blood glucose and blood pressure. When they hear that I'm going to be asking for that, they're like, wait, what? Like, just trust me. Like, you don't have a menstrual cycle, just track it for me, please. I was like, it's $30 on Amazon. If you're going to get 100 strips, you're going to do it 52 days out of the year, so it'll last you for 2 years. Now the strips will go bad after the 2 years, but It's just like one simple thing like that that can go a very long ways, not tracking weight and allowing the coach to do the thinking for you, and then be like, okay, we've been doing this without weight. I would love to get a weight variable. Could you track your weight once this month for me? And you just see where they're at and be like, okay, visually at this weight, they look like this. And then maybe you need to understand their weight around their menstrual cycle. So then you start tracking their weight week over week. And a lot of people will argue the point that you should track your weight daily so that you see the influxes. Look, when I was bodybuilding, I had 10 to 12 pound influxes in a day. I don't care about my influxes. That's going to get my head more than anything else. So understanding, and some people are fine with it and some people aren't. So understanding how that person is also important. So just like understanding human nature of how that person's going to process that information. Eating disorder backgrounds, you need to be very careful with.
That's exactly right. And I will actually argue against some of your points and say that I think in some cases, weighing in every day and seeing the fluctuations can help someone to normalize the fluctuations. However, you used a very key word. You said obsessive. That's when it's a problem. You mentioned, and so that's where I'm not really arguing your point. We're making the same point. It's the intention behind what you're doing. So I think what I'm trying to say is if you do that, but you're being obsessive, it's going to work against you. If you do that and you're being intentional and you're really considering why you're doing it and measuring other variables, like for example, at the women's workshop, someone had asked about how do you move past the number on the scale? And I was like, well, I think by focusing on so many other variables, you start to realize it doesn't matter as much. And in this sport, unless I'm going to speak specifically to bikini competitors, I've never had a judge ask me how much I weigh. And that would be really surprising. So I think when you're in a position as a coach, and especially if you have a vulnerable population, either with a history of or a current, maybe representation or some sort of, that could be disordered eating covered up by this, like, okay, let's be more mindful. Then you have to and reinforce that there's other variables that matter outside of weight. And so you mentioned measuring other things, whether that's blood pressure. Other variables are important, and I like how you said that. And then the only other thing I was going to say is you made this is a very important point, which is why I'm repeating it, which is you want to take the thinking out of the athlete, but only if it's a coach worth trusting. And then you have to build that trust because I see so many athletes blindly trust a coach and they go on autopilot mode. And the autopilot mode, whether even if you do trust your coach, I don't think you should go on autopilot mode as an athlete. Like there should be intention with what you're doing. But when you're already measuring and tracking so many variables, let your coach control those things and you execute. Now, if you notice, but if you go in autopilot mode, you can no longer pay attention to what your body's actually telling you and therefore provide detailed information to your coach, which is how I see it. I'm like, yes, you don't want to be overthinking everything your coach is giving you where you're obsessive, but also you don't want to be so detached from it that you can't understand or maybe feel what's happening when you do what your coach tells you to do.
So trusting someone blindly is a great spot to be if you can do that. It took me years of being a coachable athlete to be able to do that. And I was always playing high level sports as a kid. Like I was playing soccer and tennis. And I was playing with semi-pro tennis players when I was like 12 years old. So, um, I was coachable then, and it took me a little bit to allow someone to completely coach me. And then I did, and I got sick. And then I trusted someone again, and I had the best prep of my life. All that I had to do was take a nap once a day. It was awesome. I was hungry and I was sleepy, and that was it. That's a great prep. If you're hungry and tired, that's a really good prep, and feeling sick. So I was still performing in the gym. I couldn't lift 20 pounds, but I could press 120s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So getting to that point, especially in a prep, is extremely important for the athlete, where all that you tell them is what they need to know. Like, how are you feeling? Are you sleeping? Are you having relationship issues? How's your stress levels? Are you still able to function in your work? Those are things that you need to be focusing on because those are the things that are going to make a prep or anything else hard, being able to recover, even in an off season, because those are all the variables that are really important to getting you to your goals long term. So autopilot is a great spot to be if you can get to that point. You need to be able to trust and listen to your coach enough to be able to execute the plan. If you're asking other coaches for advice, you're with the wrong coach. And I say that in the most humble way ever because there have been a lot of athletes ask me for advice that are coached by other people or coached by my friends. And I say, you need to talk to your coach. Like, have you communicated that with your coach? Yeah, I've communicated with the coach. Well, you need to communicate with your coach because I'm not your coach and I don't know everything. Like, they've
Right.
been coaching you for how many years now? They know a lot more about you and what the situation is. And it could have been compound interest over months, and they already know that this is going on and we're expecting this to happen.
Mm.
Communicate it with them. So I think that just open line of communication is the most important variable that you're alluding to.
Mhm.
Don't be afraid to tell them, hey, I had a cheat meal or anything like that. They just need to account for it. Are they going to be happy about it? And some coaches will rip you a new one. Some coaches are just going to be, okay, thanks for I'm just like, thanks for letting me know. I was like, I'll account for it. It's going to cause X, Y, and Z. I'll just be blunt about it. Like you're not going to look 100% for your show. You just binge ate on a Wednesday. Like I'll do what I can to fix what you messed up, but that's on you at that point. I was like, get some sleep. Hopefully you're sleeping well from the dopamine.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, like that's I think a lot of those things that present during a competition prep or post show can be prevented with proper communication between coach and athlete, but also when an athlete is tuned in enough to their body and to their choices that it's not just about physique. And oftentimes in this sport, when you're considering competing in it or you have been competing in it, it's easy, I think, to get wrapped up into the physique. I'm trying to get here as fast as I can and I want to be a pro and I want to. And we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording. So let's just jump straight into the idea that a lot of people do want to almost rush to get to the result and are therefore sometimes willing to take bigger risks. And that can include natural and enhanced athletes. So why don't you just give us your perspective on that and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, so there's risk and reward when it comes to everything. And with social media becoming a more affluent place and a fitness influ I hate the word fitness influencer. Fitness influencer, you guys have influence of people and you guys are in the fitness space. All right. So with that growing and everyone wanting to rush their goal and being younger so that they can influence a younger generation and getting there now, they have lost touch with reality. And the reality of it is, it takes time to build a great physique, enhanced or non enhanced. Enhancement can expedite the process, but there's also a double edged sword involved. If you enhance improperly, you're going to damage your health. If you enhance intelligently, it still has somewhat negative ramifications. It ages you to some extent because it speeds up certain processes in the body that are not good for longevity. In the medical space, it saves your life. In this space, we're already healthy people, hopefully healthy people. The more that you take, the faster you might get to your goals. But it might also shoot your career short of how far you could have actually gotten. And that's what people don't talk about. If you're, I'm going to use males. If you're a male and you're taking multiple grams of gear, one, you can't even utilize any of that. And you're eventually going to have some type of heart attack in your mid 30s, period. You're going to cause heart strain and you're going to either have to quit the sport early on or B, you're going to die earlier, period. If, and I'm not saying that it's everyone. Like some people are going to last until their 40s. It just depends on your genetics and what you can actually genetically handle. There's also genetic responses to androgens where people hyper respond and they don't need a lot. And that's a beautiful place to be. And hopefully it doesn't impact your labs. Usually the people that hyper respond, they also impact their labs at very low amounts as well. And it causes actually more stress on their body than some people that don't genetically respond all that well. But genetics do matter. Now, you should be getting a baseline fundamental root in place of your training and your dieting and nailing that down. I can tell you right now, most Olympians that I have seen train have no clue how to train. They think they know how to train and they don't. I have not had an athlete to date that I have not had to correct someone's form, period. Most women can't grow their glutes because they're not training their major compound movements properly. Hip thrusts are not widening your waist, by the way. They are a great movement for growing your glutes if executed properly. If you're using Laura Lee as the example and the gold standard for big glutes in the bikini division, because she has amazing genetics. She doesn't need at this point to do major compound movements to grow her glutes. She has built a fundamental route where she can change very subtle variables and go a very long way. And the more genetically blessed you are, maybe the less compound movements and the less heavy weight you have to move. But you need to move them properly if you're going to build a beautiful physique. And there are gap spaces in physiques all the time. And if we want to talk about glutes, very common gap spaces that you're going to see is people that can't hip hinge properly. If you can't hip hinge properly, you're going to have lagging places in your glutes. That's going to be in your glute hamstring tie-in or your upper glute. Usually upper glute's going to be abduction movements. So things like that are where places that you can speed up and expedite the process without having to enhance. Fix your training. Most people don't know how to train. And I'm still over a decade into this, and there are still things that I'm learning today about how to train better. My arms are always a genetic weak point, and I also had a torn shoulder and nerve damage to the entire left side of my body. But I had to train differently to be able to grow my arms, and that was training them every single day. I had to constantly stimulate it. Is that going to work for everyone? No, but it worked for someone that didn't grow their arms that well, and it works time and time again. So there's something to it. But it required really good form and really methodical approaching to my training. When it comes to dieting's kind of stupid simple. You just need to make sure that you're getting your micronutrient value. And if you're not, like say you're a vegan, make sure that you're adding in micronutrients to replace that. The only issue that I see with vegans time and time again is that they have the worst guts on paper that I've ever seen. And those are the worst bacterial overgrowth cases that I have to fix. It's very resistant to bacteria kill off. Whether it's the amount of fiber that they're getting in their diet, I couldn't tell you. Most likely it is, or maybe it's high stress or lack of micronutrients that they weren't having. But needless to say, that's neither here nor there. But optimizing your diet and getting the right micronutrients, adding something in like creatine can help with so many different things. And you don't need to turn into an androgenic drug where you're going to eventually affect your femininity. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow. It may be 3 or 4 years or 5 years down the road, and all of a sudden you're sick and you don't realize that you're sick. And I see this. I've seen 10 milligrams of anabar virilize a woman and completely change her vocal cords multiple times. They had no hormones in their body. It was a terrible time to prep. What did? They jumped on anabar against everyone else saying, hey, you shouldn't run anything. They run 10 milligrams of anabar, and next thing you know, their vocal cords change, or they have clitoris enlargement, and all these things. And some of this stuff is reversible to an extent, and it usually takes time. Not all of it is completely reversible. And if you're doing compound interest over time, and let's say you're someone that's prone to having high androgenic receptor activity in your clitoris, well, every single time that you run even small amounts of androgens, you're probably going to have some type of swelling in your clitoris. Now, getting resensitization down there is very common, but having the swelling of the tissue will eventually cause growth over time. And that's something that you would have to come to terms with. If you're going to enhance, that's what's going to come. If your vocal cords change ever in a prep and they come right back after that prep, well, the next prep, your vocal cords are probably going to change much easier this go around, because now you have those androgen receptors sensitized and ready to rock and roll, and you're probably going to have your vocal cords slowly start changing. And it is what it is. That just has to be something that you come to terms with. Now, there are smart ways to do it where you reduce down virilization or completely remove it. And that's called taking your time, fixing your training, fixing your dieting, using the right androgens, and making sure that they're not fake, because all the PEDs that pretty much women use are prevalently faked. Anavar and primo. I'm just going to throw it out there since I introduced it to the bikini world by accident. And the selection is important. And this is just the number that I want people to have in their head. if you require more than 35 milligrams to 70 milligrams a week, more than that number, to get to the Olympia stage, you're doing something wrong. I'm sorry. Like you either don't have the genetics, or you're not training, or you're not dieting properly, or you're not healthy enough. All those things matter. If you're healthy enough, you will grow muscle tissue. You just need time. And a lot of the wellness athletes, those Brazilians, for instance, that were on the Olympia stage, were doing this for way over a decade. They were almost 2 decades into their lifting career. They took their time, and unfortunately, now they started to abuse drugs to try to obtain a certain look that they didn't need to. They were already top in the world, and they're starting to viralize, and they're going to start retiring soon because viralization has already come upon them.
There's so much I want to go through from what you just shared. So I'm eager to jump into it. I guess we'll start with what you just said. That's a pretty straightforward, like cut and dry, 30 to 75. Like that's a strict number. How did you come to that number for competitors?
Relative experience. If you look at Anavar, for instance, right? Like I'll just use Anavar as kind of like the tried and true one that most people are using in bikini.
Why, by the way? Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. I'm just like, why are they using that?
So Anavar is a very low androgenic compound. So this is so funny because like androgens are like sometimes good and bad.
Okay.
Androgens are always demonized, right? Like you have it's anabolic androgenic steroid. That's what steroids are. And there's a rating that people are saying is made up. It's not made up. There's a scientific mathematical equation that they use to calculate it. And is it always relative? No. Like most androgens in general tend to accrue muscle tissue at the same rate, so muscle protein synthesis. So how fast you can recover that muscle tissue and grow that muscle tissue tends to be the same across the board of everything, milligram for milligram. So then the question is like, how can you reduce down the side effects that you don't want to get? And people talk about the androgenic side effects are the side effects you don't want. Sometimes they are what you want though. So there's a double-edged sword to that side of it too. So maybe you want them binding to the tissue sites heavier than something like a testosterone or something like that. So that would make that drug way more prevalent than taking testosterone. So we want to reduce down as many side effects as we can. So Anavar is very, very well tolerated by women. If you're taking 5 milligrams of testosterone a day in a week, so 35 milligrams of testosterone per week, you're eventually going to become transgender. That is above the threshold of where they start gender changing, or at least used to. They usually do a little bit more now, but it's pretty close to that number, where they start changing a woman into a man. If you're taking 35 milligrams of Anavar a week, it's going to take a very, very long time and maybe never happen to some people eventually into a man, right? So that shows that those androgenic side effects are much lower. The gender changing effects are way lower than they would be of a testosterone. And the same can be said with other PEDs as well. And that's the reason why they actually use PEDs. So when they were looking into PEDs, they wanted to figure out a way to get the best bang for buck with the lowest side effects, right? That was the whole key to it all. And Anavar on paper was the perfect anabolic steroid. That's what they used to call it, right? There's side effects that come with everything. So because the anabolic ratio was so high to the androgenic ratio, and that's the reason why they titled it that. We know in relativity that there are other compounds that are pretty low in masculinization, pretty equivalent to it, because what's on paper is not always what's relative, right? So that's how I came up with the number was between, I use it based off like Anavar is just an easy one. If you're doing 35, or you're doing 5 milligrams a day of Anavar, that's 35 milligrams per week total. If you're doing 10 milligrams a day, that's 70 milligrams a week per total. You are going to eventually see side effects and viralization at 10 milligrams per day at some point in time. That might be 2 weeks for some, that might be 4 weeks for some, that might be 8 weeks for some, that might be 12 weeks for some. Everyone's going to be completely different. The general thumb that people like to say is 8 weeks on, 4 weeks off, 8 weeks on, and you're eventually going to start seeing some side effects if you're running that frequently. But
because of what you said earlier with how you develop androgen receptors. Is that right? And then,
It's compound interest over time. The more muscle tissue that you have, the more androgens you can handle, right?
okay.
So that's why more muscular people can handle more
Oh,
androgens.
okay.
So a big Rammy can handle way more anabolics than I can, right? Like that's just fact. Like he has more androgen receptors he can utilize.
Hmm.
Now, are they going to take over that threshold of how many androgens they can actually use? Absolutely. They're going to way oversaturate it and they're just going to get a bunch of side effects with it. And a lot of these compounds are pretty targeted. And that's actually like why SARMs came to be. Selective androgen receptor modulators. People know it by like Ostrin is the more common one in the bikini space, where they were trying to invent other type of anabolic compounds that were side effect free. I'm putting in parentheses right now. I don't know
Right.
if the
If you guys are
listeners,
watching on YouTube.
yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, there's quotations there. Uh, they come with side effects. Actually, they come with more side effects, and they were never legalized and never will be legalized because that categorization of drugs never was able to pass even rat studies where the side effects weren't coming. There was a really unique one called cardarine, and it's not a SARM. It's actually going to be used to prevent heart disease. And every single rat that they ever gave it to, now they were like super doses, right? But every single rat that they gave it to is sped up heart disease, and every rat died of heart disease. So they like
That's
never like,
definitely not good in America, let alone bodybuilding.
yeah, but
So,
people are going to use, people still use it in bodybuilding. It's a very common thing that people use in
well,
bodybuilding.
I feel like too, and maybe I'm like, like I told you before we recorded, I am like the noob of noobs on this. I don't, this is like a foreign language for me. But something I've noticed, it seems like SARMs became the selling point for coaches who didn't want to promote drug use. They're like, well, you can still be natural, but let me give you SARMs. And it became like this gray area of you won't have these side effects, which they were referring to as mainly virilization, but they were missing the other things. Now, what are some of those other side effects that you alluded to with the quotations?
Everything that steroids give you. There are no like if you're taking
Hmm.
SARMs, you're enhanced. Like you're taking anabolics, period. It's upregulating an androgen receptor. Congratulations, you're enhanced now. You're no longer natural. So hate to break it to you guys, but if you're taking SARMs, it's the equivalent of taking steroids. They work slightly differently in the body, but they accomplish the same task. There's a reason why you can't be an Olympic athlete and taking them. Now, Olympic athletes are doing PEDs. They're taking a lot of stuff to enhance. Every other athlete in every single professional sport in the entire world is taking performance enhancers of some sort, whether they're being tested or not, or whether they're getting through the system, or whether they're doing things that are loopholes. That's what they're going to be doing. And that just point and blanket statement that every professional athlete is running performance enhancers of some sort, whether it being something like a testosterone or not.
So I'm gonna ask you something maybe controversial, but you don't seem to mind. Which
No.
is the natural shows that are now really coming out in the NPC and the IFBB. We see specifically the Ben Weider natural when it comes to the IFBB stage. How common or how much could you assume that some people are like cheating that test?
Yeah, so I don't even know what the testing looks like for there. I'll be honest with you. I
Yeah.
just think if you're stepping on a natural stage, you better be natural. It's really sad to know that I was lifting for 3 years and I was bigger than a lot of the natural guys that are stepping on that stage. I was 220 pounds from 135 pounds in 2 years or 3 years of lifting.
That's awesome.
And it's like, look, be natural if you're stepping on that stage. There are some amazing natural physiques in this world, and I
It's
commend
amazing.
them. And I love natural bodybuilding. If you're enhancing or have enhanced, like taking anabolics, and then you're stepping on a stage naturally, you're no longer natural. It changes forever your physiological body. So don't step on that stage. Let the natural people have it. It's fine. It's going to be okay. Like
Yes,
just compete against the best. When I was still natural, I wanted to compete against the best. I didn't care if they were
exactly.
enhanced or not. Like I really don't care. There are plenty of bikini athletes that go pro naturally. It's not super
Mhm.
common anymore, but there are plenty of bikini pros that have gone pro naturally. There are some Olympians that are pro naturally. There are Olympians in the male divisions natural. And I'm not going to say who it is, but I know one that was natural. And, so it is possible to do it. Are you at a disadvantage? Sure. But that's your choice to make at the end of the day. And that's a personal decision. But see how high you can jump. I want to see how high a human can jump. So I don't care if you're taking steroids or not. I literally want to see how high you can jump. Because, like, it's about human advancement at the end of the day. But
Yeah.
if it is declared as a natural event, let it be to the naturals. End of story.
Agreed.
You're lying to yourself. Your moral values don't matter and your ethics don't matter at that point anymore. So don't try to push limitations. If you want to take amino acids, sure, take amino acids, take creatine. I don't really care. There was a point in time creatine was banned by the by college sports, actually. The
I
NCAA.
remember that.
When I was in
Even
college, it was banned.
Yeah, I remember when I was gonna play college volleyball and I pursued fitness, but when I was doing that, they were like, here's the list of things that you won't be able to take. I'm like, wait, I'm doing bodybuilding right now, and I'm definitely supplementing with creatine.
GNC sold me these horse pills. I'm taking them.
Why were they like this big?
Uh,
They were those were the I know exactly which ones you're talking about because I can still feel it going down my throat.
Yeah, it was like, and I can take like 50 pills at a time, but no, though, like taking two of those, which is what the dose was, is like, you just felt them going down your throat. I'm like, yeah, I'm like,
Scarred me sometimes. I was like, this is painful. No amount of water can like
I
get
didn't
this
think I had a
done.
gag reflex until I had those pills.
That's good that that's how you found it out. Um,
Savage.
so, there's a few other things I wanted to dive into from what you said. We're both like still giggling about that. I know. So sometimes it's reversible. You said this, but my mind was going in other ways too. So something that stood out to me as well was that longevity piece, and I kind of want to circle back to that because the the interesting thing to me is that risk is high, but if it shortens your amount of time in the industry, right? So if you start it when maybe you shouldn't be starting it, and now your time in the industry could be shortened as far as like the risk, if you want to keep pushing that risk, then you're almost, I guess, limiting your chances of climbing up the ranks because bodybuilding alone, it's hard to, there's one winner on stage. And then to actually go pro, although it's happening more nowadays, but it's still difficult. And so if someone's trying to go as far as they can in this sport, how do you optimize them naturally? And then how would someone, if they decided that they didn't want to stay natural, how would you then know that it's the time for them to do that so that they can achieve the results they're trying to achieve? Like if they want to hit the Olympia stage, but that could reduce their longevity because they started taking that and maybe it doesn't align with the timing for where their physique's at. Like, how do you actually judge that?
Yeah, let's talk about women in general from a biological level. So, and I'll also add in hormones into the mix, right? I hate the general rule of thumb, oh, women peak in their 20s and men peak in their early 30s, right? It's like, I know men that are hypogonadism in their teens. It's like they peaked way earlier on because stresses in life and way too much blue light exposure probably nowadays from the environmental conditions. So
True.
let's talk about this from like literally peaking. So women, in my personal opinion, are peaking in their careers at their mid to late 30s if done properly, maybe early 40s, just depends. Not saying that you can't be on the Olympia stage in your early 40s. You absolutely can, and you should be. Men should peak in their late 30s to mid 40s. And we have seen this time and time again within bodybuilding history where the best physiques of all times were around that age. So if we're going based off of historical track records, that's where it was. Now, women, I'm pushing back that timetable into like their mid to late 30s because we have the medical means to make sure that you can stay functioning well as an athlete where your hormones aren't down regulating and we can replace bioidentical hormones if needed because of the high stress that you're putting your body through all the time. Like when you see little gymnasts, they never hit puberty until they're in their 20s. Like they look like little girls until they're in their 20s and they hit puberty when they're in their 20s because of all that stress. They literally couldn't go through puberty. So that's one reason why they look so young usually. Like they might look like they're like literally like 12 or 14 years old and they're literally like 18 to 20 years old. They never hit puberty. And then all of a sudden they start getting a lot of feminine features when they're in their mid-20s, when they quit gymnastics, when they're Olympic gymnasts. It's very common
Mhm.
to see. So, um, how do I optimize that process? What are the time frames? Well, now we're talking timetables, right? So if you're in your mid-20s and you're a female, well, maybe you've pushed the majority of what your natural hormones can do. What I would do is I'd run labs. I'd see where your labs are at, see what you can optimize there. Are you estrogen dominant? Can I bring down your estrogen levels to reduce down some body fat in the off season to keep you a little bit tighter and pull up your progesterone levels, which we know is great for preventing things like osteoporosis. These are all things that help with anabolic factor ways. Is your testosterone levels low? So if your testosterone levels are low, which women stop jumping on freaking TRT at 20 years old, having in the 20s of testosterone is normal. That's a healthy woman. If you're running above a 40 or 50 nanogram per deciliter testosterone level on labs, most likely they're going to eventually diagnose you with PCOS. And PCOS, by the way, is resolvable, polycystic ovarian syndrome. This is usually due to the fact that there's a high stress environment. Your insulin levels, sorry, your blood glucose levels are running high, and that's affecting your insulin, and your insulin levels are running high. So you're becoming quote unquote insulin resistant. Sometimes this leads to, on paper, pre-diabetic ranges for women. And it changes the way that your hormones are pathwaying, leading to lower progesterone levels, sometimes estrogen levels. In general populace, we see high estrogen levels usually with PCOS. And then you see androgen dominance, which is where your testosterone levels are too high and your free androgen index is too high. So your free testosterone levels are too high, which is usually self-induced within the sport. It's not like true PCOS. It's not where you put on a bunch of weight and became insulin resistant. It's usually due to high cortisol levels and high stress levels and overstimulant use. So those are all things that are biological that you can optimize. So optimizing that menstrual cycle is going to give you longevity. Fixing your training is the number one thing that I would preface, and optimizing that recovery time, probably reducing down the amount of times in a week that you're training. Women can't train 6 days a week. They can handle usually higher amounts of intensity in their training than a man can, though, for sure. You guys are meant to be able to handle more intense training. Like if you put a man through a wellness training program and a woman through a wellness training program, that dude is going to be throwing up halfway through the workout every single time. And the woman's going to be like, yeah, I'm ready to go for another set. And then like the guy's gas for another 5 minutes. It's just
Why? Why is that?
hormones and the way that we're built.
Huh.
We're built to be able to handle a high stress load, but we're not like you guys are meant to be able to carry babies at the end of the day, right? And it has to like a
Yeah.
lot of that has to do with hormones, like
Hmm.
estrogen. It's a big one. That's your dominant hormone. So you guys catch your breath a lot easier. We're also bigger, so we have more stress on our hearts at all times. That's why I would assume that most women last a little bit longer than men. Is we're just bigger and we have the same size heart. So whenever you look at nature, the bigger dog is going to die before the smaller dog is going to die, unless it's something obviously happens, because it's just more stress on the heart. So it could be a amount of the oxygen that you have to carry through the body. So there's some there. Um, but yeah, figuring out the right training for that person and making sure that they have optimal training, recovery windows of time is where I preface. And then when it comes to enhancement, it's like, where are you starting to slow down? Are your labs optimized? Is it time? And if it is time and you guys make that decision together, it should be what are what are you getting into first off? What are the side effects that can come with it? I think is the number one thing that you need to talk about, and not what are the benefits. Everyone talks about the benefits of it. They don't talk about the side effects. I'll talk about the negative way before the positive. And because that should scare you out of it. And if you're not scared out of it and you're well versed in it and you've been studying this for years and you understand and you've watched videos or read content from medical doctors, well, medical doctors try to freak you out a lot of times, open-minded medical doctors, finding the right resources. Then, and you're taking that step, it's always better to start lower than higher. You never know how you're going to respond. Even if you're a healthy individual, you might be able to handle a very low amount before side effects become prevalent. And that's your threshold. And that's just something that you're going to have to come to terms with. There's also different phases that I see within women where they can handle more and they can handle less without side effects coming. But usually you have a general track record when you're at a low dose and you see how someone is responding to it, and then you increase dosing to see what the tolerance level is. And again, cautioning on that lower side to reduce down risk is very important. And you also don't want to hopefully even get side effects, right? Besides sex drive increasing, that would be awesome. Or, but if you lose your menstrual cycle very easily, that's a really good tracker to have in an off season versus an on season.
Mhm.
Because when you're on season and you're starting to tax your adrenals, and then you take androgenic drugs and you're taxing your ovarian to pituitary axis way, so the brain and the ovaries talk together to produce hormones, and then your adrenals also produce hormones. When you tax both systems at the same time, you're going to have a much easier down regulation of those natural hormones. So having a tracker when you're not completely tanking out your stress levels is a really good track record to have, um, to see if you're going to lose a menstrual cycle very easily or not. Because if you do, well, at least you know, like, hey, if you hop on this, you're going to lose your menstrual cycle. That's what's going to happen. You don't have a resilient access way. And again, that's just something to note for you. And every woman is going to be different. That's why everyone asks me for a protocol or a cookie cut way to do things. Women are not cookie cut. And that's the reason why I wasn't producing PED content for women for a long time, because I introduced certain things to the world by accident, behind the scenes, and it bled out into the entire bikini world. And I stopped doing it because people were not understanding what it is supposed to be used for or how it's supposed to be used.
Well, talk about what happened. Talk about that story because like I think that would help conceptualize that point more.
Yeah, so primo is something that I introduced by accident within the bikini world behind the scenes. Certain labs and markers aligned to it. So manipulated some compounds around to reduce down overall like androgen load, and seeing what the response would be, and the response was positive. And then it kind of like word started spreading through the bikini world, and it kind of like blew the cap off of it, where a lot of women are using like primo within the bikini space, which in my personal opinion, it's a very niche use. And primo, and let me explain this to you because you don't even know what primo is. Primobolan was a drug used for breast cancer for a short period of time, as well as osteoporosis that's so FDA approved for in certain countries.
Hmm.
It's a very low virilizing compound as far as androgenic compounds are considered. And because of how it binds, it helps to reduce down estrogen. So that's really where it's a good utility. However, people use way too much, and people forget that androgens are androgens. So when you're taking large androgen loads, you're gonna get the side effects eventually anyway. It doesn't matter what you're taking, end of story. And there's a very niche use. Bikini athletes aren't supposed to be hard on stage. And you also don't want to reduce on estrogen too low, because you will lose a menstrual cycle eventually. Usually you lose a menstrual cycle in this world, in this space, due to low progesterone levels, not estrogen levels. So if someone's like coming back with like higher levels, maybe it makes sense. But if someone naturally is a harder athlete, why would you implement something like a primo into the mix? Now, it's still just like any other androgenic drug is going to increase skeletal muscle glycogen. So the carbs and the retention of those carbs in that muscle tissue, it will expand. However, from a physiological standpoint, Anavar, from my personal opinion, it gives a much fuller, bounder look than Primo does. Um, Primo is more predominantly used within the more muscular spaces like figure, women's physique. Um, so that's kind of what happened there. But I want to talk about the Latin Americas really fast, just while we're on the subject
Yeah.
of like different compounds that I don't think should be getting used within bikini.
Yeah.
So there are Latin American women that are completely getting ruined very early on in their early 20s. They're super genetically blessed, will eventually be on the Olympia stage, probably naturally. And they're running heavy duty amounts of Winstrol, heavy duty amounts of Masteron, which I don't even know how that came into the equation, but Masteron, maybe they can't get real primo or something, so they're using Masteron. And I'm also seeing NPP, sometimes even Tren. So NBP and Tren are NOR19s. Tren, by the way, is the one that all the bros make memes about like seeing like the wind blows in, you get an erection kind of thing. Like It was actually used medically with women for 2 years in France. It was the only country that legalized it, and then they pulled it from the market because the side effects were so high, and the dosing was definitely way too high. But Nor-19s are progestins, so birth control normally nowadays, most commonly, is going to be a progestin, so a synthetic progesterone. That's what NBP and Tren is. So they thought that Tren would have been well tolerated. It's not. NBP in the medical space has a very niche use with women because it tends to be the only Nor-19, that only anabolic synthetic progesterone that's well tolerated by women, actually. But it's a very niche case, and it should never, ever be needed within bikini space. But I just wanted to categorize that within like birth control because people forget that birth control is a steroid. It's
Mhm.
either an estrogen or a progestin, so a progesterone, synthetic progesterone, or a blend of both. And those do bind to androgen receptors and stuff like that. So it's not just like magically like stopping your menstrual cycle. It's reducing down your natural hormones, just like what an anabolic would do as well.
Why Latin America? Are you just seeing this an influx from Latin Americans, or what is that a different reference that you're making?
I don't know if they don't care, they're just getting really bad advice, or that they can't
Okay.
get the proper PEDs, right?
Mhm.
So my theory is that instead of Anavar, because it's so hard to get down there, potentially that they use Winstrol, but they use like heavy duty amounts of Winstrol. And Winstrol is not a well tolerated androgen by women. Medically, it can actually be used by women. It's still FDA approved in the US. It's a very, very weird used case that I'm surprised they actually still have the FDA legalized, to be honest. I'm actually all for it. There is a really good use case for it, but it's with cytokine storms. For instance, I can't say the word on the podcast, but it would help with coughing attacks essentially. So you know where I'm going with that. So it's a really good used case for that scenario, and that's like taking cortisone, right? Like it's a steroid. It reduces down inflammation. That's what steroids do. It technically reduce down inflammation. It's really good for cortisol management. That one just happens to be really good by where it binds to for coughing attacks, coughing fits. It's very heavily used within the Latin America space. Like I'm talking like male dosages. And then there's also male dosages of one that's never been FDA legalized, which is boldenone or equipoise. It's actually used with horses. And it is very commonly used right now within the Latin America space and the wellness space and stuff like that, which has like no use case within humans. And it drives up red blood cell count. So you get really bad blood pressure issues down the road. And then with blood pressure issues and high red blood cell count, you actually get stress, eventually renal stress. So kidney stress eventually. And a
Mhm.
lot of people are using pharmaceutical grade diuretics, which if you don't approach it properly and you cut off all your water, well, guess what? You're probably eventually going to get some scar tissue development in your kidneys over time. Again, not today, maybe down the road, but heart attacks and stuff like that we've seen from heavy duty use of stuff. And not going to really talk further about it, but that's just like high level, like indirect correlations, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting too, because it takes me to a point that you made earlier that got my brain wondering about things, which is you're measuring for the side effect. When you say that, are you talking about negative side effects, or are you also like, how are you tracking if the dose is actually making a positive impact on the athlete as opposed to if they weren't maybe taking it? Like, how do you actually know it's affecting them?
I'm going to make the most blunt statement ever. Drugs work.
Okay. So
Big pharma would be out of business if drugs didn't work.
true.
Right, like they wouldn't be getting
True.
used or they wouldn't have gotten approved, right? They want to
Yeah.
make sure that they work, and they want to make sure that the drug's going to sell and they're going to make money off of it. So they work, period, end of story. So you're going to get positive net benefactor out of it.
Okay.
Where does the rubber hit the pavement? And that's what you want to know, right? And this is
Yeah.
natural things, can rubber can hit the pavement too. People don't actually talk about like things like metformin.
Yeah.
Metformin is an anti-androgen, so it helps women with like PCOS. Now it predominantly helps women with PCOS because of it helps with blood glucose control. It's an anti-diabetic drug, but it's also an anti-androgen. So it can reduce down something called mTOR, which helps with muscle protein synthesis directly, can reduce it down. But where does rubber hit the pavement? Where, because we have studies that show in older people, it can improve how much muscle tissue they have, but we can also see it reducing down directly muscle protein synthesis.
Hmm.
So it's like, where does rubber hit the pavement? It's probably going to be a net positive more than anything. Like metformin is probably one of the few drugs I'd consider like a miracle drug where there's more net positive than anything else. It'd be related to a natural thing called berberine, and berberine and semaglutide were being compared just recently. So I've always been talking about berberine like nonstop because I love it. I love that it's natural. It's basically a natural form of metformin. Um,
Yeah. I've done berberine before for myself based on blood work that my coach saw and he recommended that. And I found like that was positive for me. And I think when you're like as a natural competitor, I think you want to capitalize on what you can as best you can. And even those who end up going enhanced, they generally will say like that they're glad that they waited as long as they could, and actually that they feel better when they're enhanced. And so it gave them an ability to like perform better and continue in a way that maybe they wouldn't have had they not. And you mentioned cortisol earlier, so this is something I wanted to touch on with you. What do you most commonly see causing an increase in cortisol, and what are you actually doing to support people in managing that when they're trying to compete?
Want to talk about life or do you want to talk about physicality factor? So
Well, also, okay, you had a video. I don't remember when. Like I said, I went on a rabbit hole, okay? But your video was like, yeah, I could make, and maybe it was even recently, I don't know. You're like, I could make someone's blood work say a certain thing, like if I have them tested at a certain time. So I thought about, the times where my cortisol has been higher. It's like, well, I went through something really negative like 3 days before, and then it was up. But like you said, sometimes that can be like a fake, not a fake, but a misrepresentation
yeah.
of the whole. So yeah, how do you actually know when it's a legit thing? How are you managing that? Why is that even important for people to consider?
Yeah, so cortisol management is extremely important for more women more than men because it has to do with blood glucose control and blood glucose, like insulin, will directly affect hormone pathwaying. So whether it's going to an androgen bucket or going into like the progesterone bucket or going into the estrogen bucket, because it's called steroidogenesis. We basically have the mother of all hormones. You basically get cholesterol, it converts into pregnenolone and then DHEAS, and then it starts funneling down into all the buckets, right? And the body's going to just funnel it into where it's going to go. And enzymatic production changes them into what they're going to do. And then you get labs and you see where things are at. So when it comes to cortisol, it's super interesting. When lab testing is, I almost omit the blood test. Why? Because is it accurate? Yes, it is accurate. At that one point in time, at that one point during the day,
Hmm.
does that tell me anything of what your cortisol patterns are or your circadian rhythm? Not really. Why? Well, you're already awake for X amount of time. Your cortisol levels should essentially be raising because that's a natural waking response. And then eventually later on in the day, they should start to reduce. So there's something called a 4-point urine analysis test. I don't like saliva tests as much, but the 4-point urine analysis test is pretty accurate. There's also a free way that you can do it instead of spending money on a Dutch test or something like that, which is $400. You can do a fast and you can test your blood glucose and see where it's low and high through the day. Why? Because if you don't have to eat carbohydrates to have blood glucose in your system. If you didn't have blood glucose, you would be dead. Period. End of story. I don't care if you're on a carnivore diet or anything like that, eating no carbohydrates, you have blood glucose in your system. So that's like one free way that you can do it is basically blood glucose monitoring, and that's why I find it so important. I like fasted blood glucose more than anything else. If your fasted blood glucose is continually elevated, all right, well, let's get a 3-point read. Let's make sure that it's not like you didn't sleep bad one night. Sleeping bad one night will just like that could be high cortisol spike in the middle of the night and you have a high blood glucose number the next day. So let's say that you're doing a 3-point analysis test and like we're just going to do 3 days in a row, nothing crazy. I usually don't even tell the client what I'm doing. I'm just like, just run it for 3 days. Continually elevated above like 100, so you're in like pre-diabetic ranges. All right, well, you're probably not sleeping well at nighttime or your circadian rhythm's off or something like that. So let's start fixing things. So that's one way that I track cortisol levels is blood glucose testing. It's a cheap, basically free way to do it. And I don't have to get like anal about the data where like I actually hate this. This is one of my biggest knocks in the coaching space. They get labs back and they're like, oh, you're dying. We need to fix all this stuff. It's like, no, they're not dying. It's like actually their labs are pretty good. So
Mm.
that's another thing. Like that like I'm not an extreme person. Like I'll fix whatever needs to be fixed and that's it. But I try to be as bare minimal as possible because one, OCD tendencies tend to be prevalent in this sport. If you put in their head that they're dying, they probably think that they're dying. So fix what needs to be fixed, tell them what they need to know, and just have them believe and stay positive, and they're probably going to get fixed pretty easily. Mindset's a lot. So cortisol management when it comes to training would be reducing down training days, optimizing training windows of time, maybe even refeeding to replenish glycogen. Carbs are actually amazing for reducing down cortisol levels, which no one really talks about. So yeah, we're talking about micronutrition. Imagine that.
All right.
So that's one thing that can help with it. So refeed days are really good. Reduction in training. Actually, steps in a day are really good. Steps outside, not doing hard, rigorous training activities. It's also good for cholesterol levels. So
Mhm.
zone two style training. Steps in a day is actually predominantly what I use with women for tracking, unless if like I just know that they're not getting their heart rate elevated in a prep. And I'm like, all right, you're doing X amount of steps in a day. That's your baseline. You're doing this amount of cardio, this beat per minute, right?
Mm.
And I don't do anything crazy. I don't really like hit training with women. That's another thing that I really commonly see is high amounts of hit training close to a show and it driving up cortisol levels and reducing down recovery times, and it's wasting away all the glycogen and their glutes start to go flat. So that, well, especially in the bikini space. So I don't like Stairmaster. I like treadmill. I like outside. I like elliptical. I like the basically non-invasive ways of doing cardio. I just think it builds a better look and it's a lower stress load. Um, Relationship stress, all that stuff matters, especially when it comes to a woman. It impacts a woman's biological levels way easier than a man's. So understanding what's going on in their life, like I don't need to know all the details. I just need to know that, hey, you're not sleeping at nighttime because you guys are fighting. All right, cool. If you want to talk, let me know. I'm not your therapist, but I'm more than happy to offer some advice if you ever want it. You're probably telling me you probably want some advice. So that's that's another thing that's like huge is just like the life stresses that go into it. Um, because it also helps you delineate out like, hey, is there something I can deploy to help them with cognitive focus during their day in the life of work, right?
Yeah.
Or are they having a reduction in their mood so they're not happy? Maybe it's their dopamine levels that are being affected, and you can aid in their dopamine because that's something that people really don't talk about is prolactin levels with women before a menstrual cycle that drastically. I try to explain this analogy all the time. It's like a man being on tren and how moody they are when a woman's having a menstrual cycle every single month, right before their menstrual cycle, their prolactin levels skyrocket up. And there are ways to help control prolactin levels, but that could drastically be affecting a relationship every single month. So
Mhm.
that could be something as simple as like, hey, why don't we implement X, Y, and Z? Let's just let me know how you do. And just leave it at that, right? Very, very baseline.
That's actually part of my concern as a mental health professional, something I didn't understand why we really treated or put in our own diagnostic manual is PMDD. Because I'm like, this is probably more physiological than anything. So as a counselor, I'm really just meeting people where they're at to manage the impact of it on their life and help them to find other ways to literally increase their dopamine during that time and maintain it throughout the day and find ways to do that and also proactively prepare for that change in mood. But so much of it, I think, is more physiological. So it's funny as a counselor, I see we see so much that's really physiological, but we also see so much that's not managed psychologically that could be. So that's where we do come into play. So both play a role, and I'm glad you said that. And actually, you answered like a lot of my rapid fire questions in that. You talked about the water cuts, you talked about the hit and how you don't usually do that, especially with women. And that's another thing I can attest to as an athlete. There was one season I got worse and worse. By the time I hit USA's in 2020, I was like, what happened? I was run down completely as an athlete. And at the time, I was doing things like water cutting and my food was dropping. I wasn't feeding into the show. Like there was so much happening. I looked like a flat bean. Like I literally looked like a string bean on stage. I'm like, I looked better 3 months ago. And now this kind of sucks. But so you touched on that. Now I'm just gonna ask you the other rapid fire questions and then I'll go into some of the other ones because we're already kind of on this zone. What are your thoughts? Like, do you believe in waist trainers? Maybe answer that in one sentence or
Hmm.
less, and then we'll find some that we can expand on.
Yeah, I like waist trainers. It's funny because like everyone's like, David, you don't believe in waist trainers. No, I believe in waist trainers. If you're a sedentary person that's sitting down at a desk job, then a waist trainer is going to help you because you probably have a pretty weak core. Is it going to make your waist look smaller? No. But if you slouch and you don't have good core control or strength, yes. If you were an ex-athlete, using a waist trainer is going to help you reduce down how much you're activating your obliques, most likely. I was an
Hmm.
athlete for years, and I can honestly attest that a waist trainer did help. Do I need a waist trainer to get my waist back down to that size? Absolutely not. I don't need it anymore. Did it help me at that moment in time when I had thicker obliques earlier on in my bodybuilding career? Absolutely did. Can you do that naturally? I mean, if you're doing your vacuums daily and stuff like that, you're going to tighten down your waist. It's mainly diet anyways, but work on your posture. You have to work on your core strength anyways if you use a waist trainer. But yes, waist trainers do work.
I'm glad when you said that I wasn't in my usual posture of like, what are we, normally I'm like, so you said that I'm like, oh, thank God this isn't one of those awkward, like, let me slowly lift myself back up as you saying that. Okay, so do you believe in like structured, more bro diet style meal plans or a macro approach?
Both. So it depends on the person. Some people do really good with meal plans and some people do really well with macros. I'll be honest, if I give a meal plan to someone, I expect them to change out their foods besides when they're in season, just because I need to know the variables that are in season. But if someone is really good with tracking macros, however they're tracking their macros, I don't want to change that up. So I will keep them on a macro diet. So I do both. It depends on the person. Some people, from a psychological standpoint, they really like meal plans, or they at least like structure to their day and they don't want to think. So they just like that meal plan. But I give the macros with it also so they can do substitutions. And usually the way that I say is if you have chicken and you want to do a lean turkey, do a lean turkey. Especially in the off season. Like I want you to mix stuff up. I just can't change your stuff literally on a daily basis. So here's your macros. But just one-to-one substitutions are easy to make. Um, Macros I'm cool with, but everyone tracks macros slightly differently. Some people track vegetables, some people don't. The only way that I usually have to dive into questions around macros is when they're overeating on their vegetables, way overeating in a prep, and they're getting super bloated. And I'm like, you're having too much fiber. Everyone thinks that fiber helps with digestion. It helps to a degree, and then eventually it has a downward spiral effect.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like it's so easy to overeat vegetables in your prep because you're like, this is free food, but it's not. It adds up real fast. Like I remember when I wasn't really aware of macro tracking, but I would like cut up so much zucchini and then I would cook it. And then I was like eating so much of it. And now I look back and I'm like, no wonder I didn't like it wasn't consistent over time because some weeks I was eating all like a whole bag of zucchini, like a pound probably. And then another week I was having like maybe a quarter of that.
This is super bro science that you brought up zucchini. So back in the day when I used to cut down, I think I was in college or maybe right after college. If I would go to cut, if I was having 1 cup of rice, instead of 1 cup of rice, I'd have 1 cup of zucchini instead because it was a decent amount of calories, but it still gave me the same amount of volume that I was getting from the rice. It may have not been as starchy, but that was an awesome way that I used to cut down. Super like bro science way of cutting down,
Interesting.
but it works.
Yeah, like some of my girlfriends will like shave zucchini into their oatmeal or whatever. But okay, so let me ask you, do you believe in fasted cardio?
I just did a post on this. No. So yes and no. Sorry, I have to get both sides of the spectrum here. All right. Do I think that faster cardio is good for some people? Yes. If you're a morning person, faster cardio is going to be really good for you. Or if it helps you from a cognition standpoint to start off your day doing cardio, makes you feel good throughout the day, it's really good. If there are certain drugs in place or supplements in place that do better fasted, it makes a slight difference because every percentage does matter. But if you're not going to be intense during that workout just to try to get effects of a little bit of a supplement to get that 1% difference, I'd rather do my cardio later on in the day. I would just space it away from the training. So maybe do it at
Mm.
lunchtime and then do your training later on in the day kind of thing. Like she used to do that in corporate. And it's calories in versus calories out at the end of the day. It doesn't matter. But if your intensity of your cardio is suffering because you're trying to get fasted cardio in, or you're having to rely on a copious amount of stimulants to get that cardio in, it might just be better to do it later on in the day.
Yeah. Remind me to talk to you about stimulants after I ask you this one. What are your thoughts on water cutting, specifically peak week?
I think some of the water protocols are just stupid. So I don't use pharmaceutical diuretics. It's funny, I made so many posts about it, and I've gotten DMs like, "Hey man, what diuretic did you use this person?" I was like, I use micronutrition to macronutrition, so it's going to be vitamins and stuff like that. If I do any type of water manipulation, in fact, I'll probably make a supplement at some point in time for peak week. That's a natural supplement that works really well, just because I found things that work. So upregulating things like motility to make sure that people aren't getting backed up and sleeping better are going to be the best thing. The best diuretic is good sleep. And I think that there might be a time and a place for diuretics, right? Like pharmaceuticals. I've used personally 3/4 of a diazide in the last 3.5 years of coaching.
Mm.
I don't really find a used case for it. And the times that I've used it, I just had to give the person more water. So you have to have some type of water in your system, or else you stop shuttling nutrients and your muscle tissue just goes flat. If you're actually stage ready, you're storing predominantly your water in your organs, your blood, and your muscle tissue because you can't store subcutaneous fat if there's no fat there. And I'm going to make a post probably of a guy that was just bone peeled, didn't need any type of water cut. I put people on stage having 2 gallons of water on the day of the show. Everyone's different. There is manipulations needed to electrolytes for sure. Most of the time, we don't live in a perfect world, and especially if PEDs are involved, it affects things like angiotensin and a few other things that uptake water. So electrolyte manipulation might be needed. It just needs to be tactful, and you need to know that person. And you need to watch that person as you're peaking them if you're changing those variables. But with bikini athletes that are stage ready, I find water cutting usually more detrimental than anything else. Sometimes I just have to reduce down water because they're scared that they're going to pee themselves when they're on stage. I'm not making this up. Like I hear it.
True.
If they're drinking like 2 gallons of water, it's like their tiny little girl or
No, it's so
woman,
true.
and like they're like, I don't want to pee myself. I was like, we could go down to a gallon of water, right? Like, or like usually I don't have a woman at 2 gallons of water. It's very, very uncommon. They have to be way more muscular, but usually like a gallon to a gallon and a half. And I find like the lowest usually that I have a bikini athlete is like 3/4 a gallon of water, and you can upregulate circulation without using pharmaceutical grade diuretics. And you don't have the stress on the kidneys like you would, like a forcible stress. Because if you have forcible stress, the body has biological ways of uptaking water anyways.
Hmm. That's so interesting. I've heard people argue that it matters if you chug it versus sip it. Is that true?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You want a steady drip of water through your system for sure. So if you
Versus
have,
chugging it.
yeah, because most likely you're going to pee it out. So like you do want that steady drip of water. And another thing is if you're doing water manipulation and you're drying someone out, and when you hit that look that you want to bring to the stage, figure out how much water they're excreting. You should know this by this point anyways, but you should know how much
Mm.
water they're excreting in an hour and match it. Because if not, they just start going flat. Like you have to have water. So some people are like 6 ounces of water to 8 ounces of water per hour. Sometimes people are more. And also, if you're like they have anything that's pushing water harder, it might be more water than that. But then you also have to take into account with water comes sodium. So you might be flushing out sodium as well. So a lot of times people go flat from lack of sodium, which is something that people just don't talk about. Like anytime I hear like, hey, Someone asked me this literally 10 times. I don't, and my answer was the same every single time. What about, should I be having sodium? Yeah, you should be having sodium. Not in a peak week, just like, should I be having sodium? Yes.
Yeah.
Like, you need salt. Salt is literally needed, or else it's an electrolyte. We need salt. Yes. It's good for performance. It's good for everything. It's good for, you need sodium to shuttle glycogen. It is needed for bodily processes.
Like literally though, I was that person back in like high school when I was in like the diet culture type of situation. It was like, well, you shouldn't have too much salt and don't. But it's like, no, it's the foods that they're telling, you know what I'm saying? So then they demonize the salt instead of the fact that it's actually good for you. And then I remember I learned that, oh no, you just need to drink water. Like eat salt, drink water. And then my recent season, I was drinking so much water and my muscles were not filling out the way they had been during the week. And then my coach was like, wait, you need even more salt right now. And we did that. And suddenly now my glutes were full again. And we're like, oh my gosh, like, but coming from a version of myself that never ate salt, just to learn to salt my meals was actually really hard, where I was never getting enough salt, where what is like little bit of salt for some people was like so much for me. So I can relate to that person. But then again, I'm like, now I'm so glad. It also helps so much with cravings too. Like if you get your salt in, I feel like you just notice your cravings go much further down.
Yeah, I'm actually a person that craves salt rather than sweets. So it's always like, as long as I have salt, I was always fine. And I've always loved the statement, I looked great 15 minutes before the stage and looked terrible on stage. No,
Mm.
it's like the only thing that would, like a rice cake wouldn't fix that, by the way. What would fix that is some water and salt.
Mm.
So that's like the number one thing that I tell people is like, it was probably lack of electrolytes, because that can fix you within like minutes if it's actually water and sodium. But food, you should be loaded down and ready to rock and roll basically like 2 days before the show almost, unless you have like a weight cap. Like men's bodybuilding is a little bit different, but like you can retain that glycogen for a long period of time, as long as you're like kind of kicking it and relaxing and not running a marathon and running out and shopping the day before the show. Yeah, don't do that. I've had people do that. You want to talk about
I feel like,
inflammation? Go shopping the day before the show.
well,
It,
you've coached top Olympians. How do you manage that when they're doing their meet and greets and they're working the expos and they're trying to, like, how are you managing for that?
day in the life, they should be ready for stage. So the biggest thing is basically getting them off their feet when they're ready, or if they can't get off their feet at the meet and greet for a few seconds. The other thing is usually they're pretty okay with the athletes like leaving after a certain period of time. Like if they're getting inflammation or something like that, like they can leave. But I mean, they have to show their face. The fans are there for
Mhm.
them, and you should be stage ready. Like that's point blank. Like, and you're not going to be on stage like immediately after. You can fix a lot of stuff in short periods of time as long as you know what you're doing. But the general rule of thumb is, and this is actually done with NASA, 15-degree angle incline helps with inflammation drastically. Like you don't have to have your feet completely inverted against the wall like a lot of people do. It just has to be 15 degrees. Just so like two pillows, that like two hotel pillows, okay? Not your own bed pillows, one bed pillow. And that should be enough of an elevation to get some inflammation
You
out.
put your foot on one hotel pillow,
Yeah,
it's
just
flat on the
all the way down to the bottom.
ground. Oh man. Okay, well that was great for the rapid fire. I know I said I wanted to talk to you about stimulants. You said that can be overused and then cause issues moving forward. When you're talking about stimulants, are you talking about things like a cup of coffee, or are you talking about like someone taking a caffeine pill?
Everything. I would Stimulants is just like androgens, right? Like all androgens add up together to being one collective bucket, in my personal opinion, for like side effects. Stimulants are the same way, where they're hitting a lot of the same receptors in the brain. So caffeine, it could be teocrine, which is a more common one that are starting to see nowadays. I actually like it for the neuro benefits a little bit better than caffeine. Adderall, Vyvanse, all these things, they add up to being a stimulant bucket. And where are you oversaturating this bucket where you're starting to tank your adrenals? because if you tank your adrenal before you start a prep, you're done. Like the other, so people go from high cortisol states to low cortisol states. You know what PEDs are really good at? Steroids, reducing down cortisol levels. What happens when you already have low cortisol levels? Well, you're probably not going to respond too well or feel too good on them. So you're not improving anything. You're probably making yourself feel a little bit worse. I've also seen like people do really poorly with like in bikini space clenbuterol. Um, I've seen people respond really poorly to clenbuterol where they get really sleepy from it. Well,
Hmm.
they probably have like no cortisol left in the tank. And if that happens, they're in a really bad spot in their prep. So, or they hopefully are really close to the show. But at that point, it's about reducing down stimulants and hoping that you can give them a little bit of a break to get their cortisol levels back up a little bit so that they're having some type of waking response. But that circadian rhythm is jacked up at that point. And when you're in a low cortisol state, it's a much worse place to be than in a high cortisol state. High cortisol states can be fixed relatively easily. Low cortisol states take time.
Interesting. So the overuse of stimulants could actually lead to a reduction in cortisol. Am I understanding that correctly?
Now, one more time.
An increase of stimulants can lead to a reduction of cortisol.
Over time, it'll increase and then it will reduce. And once it reduces,
Interesting.
once it tanks, that's people refer to it's not a medical terminology, adrenal fatigue. Everyone knows it by general term. Um, that's what it's referring to is
Hmm.
like where you're not producing enough cortisol, so you're not getting a waking response anymore, or you're not getting a cortisol response. That's why people need such high amounts of stimulants to try to get a response, is because they can't get their cortisol levels to raise up anymore. So they're taking copious amounts, or they're taking amphetamines to drive it up.
Yeah. You know what? That's interesting. So I'm like reflecting on myself and I'm like, I got addicted to caffeine in my last prep because I was finishing grad school and I was doing an internship while running a business on this podcast and prepping. And so I was up at like 3 a.m. to do what I needed to do. And I sacrificed sleep. And then with that came the influx of how much can I take without uh dying. And then I found out that generally actually over time it started to make me more sleepy. Like I could drink an energy drink and within an hour and a half I'd be knocked out. And I'm like, okay, something's up. And I went like after that prep, I remember I was like, cut everything. And it was brutal at first, dude. My head was like gonna explode, but it was worth it. And now I don't need it as much, but I know that that's a common thing for competitors, especially like when you're working or you're busy doing other things. And let's talk about the mental side of that. When you take a stimulant, you're almost like on a little high. But if you already have anxiety over time, now you have higher anxiety. So, and then if you're depressed and then you hit that tanking point, now you're more depressed and you need more and more to get yourself up because there's this shortcut that happens where your brain's like, oh, caffeine equals better mood. Well, then every time you tank a little bit, it's like an addiction. You're tempted to have more because, oh, well, that'll bring my mood up. That'll help me focus. And I feel like it's very easy to fall into that because it's a accessible drug, right? You can go to the convenience store and get it. You can eat a piece of chocolate and get it. So like you can get it so easily that it becomes like you want it and it's justifiable because anyone can have it.
I'm gonna relate it to actually, I'm gonna go extreme for a second.
Yeah.
Relate it to like painkillers and working out. So there's a lot of people that it used to be really prevalent in the bodybuilding space where people would take like painkillers, go to the gym and crush the gym.
Hmm.
You can't work out without the painkillers anymore because one, you're getting a good workout every single time. So that dopamine, you know that you can lift a little bit more weight with it, you know? So you become hooked on it, maybe from a mental standpoint, not just the opioid standpoint. And what happens if you travel to a show and you happen to forget whatever pill that was? Oh my gosh, the world is ending. And now you want to talk about high stress levels and ruining your physique? You can ruin a physique in a short period of time by pumping out some aldosterone through your system. Now,
Mhm.
aldosterone is the one thing that I would say that like can ruin a physique in a very short period of time. Very short period of time. I've seen it. I've seen people subconsciously stress, and I can see it in the back of their eyes, and I know they're pumping aldosterone through their system. And I'm like, cool, they're in their physique. I have like 15 minutes to reverse this out, or else they're done for. So trying to prevent the aldosterone release, that will help, that will uptake water, that will completely ruin a physique in a short period of time. So yeah.
Wow, how interesting. So, let's actually talk about the mental and physical toll, or maybe even emotional toll coaching takes on you. Like, how do you handle those demands?
I think like the biggest thing, and I was almost going to make a post about this in the beginning of the year. I really haven't been working out that much, like I've been really been taking care of myself. I've been so focused on other people, and I've been working until like 4 a.m. in the morning. Last night was 3 a.m. in the morning, and that's not really common for me, but it has been lately. It's been a theme for the last several weeks. So it is extremely taxing, but the reason why it doesn't feel taxing is because I love coaching. I genuinely love coaching. And I feel like the people that don't genuinely love coaching and they're doing it for the money, or they're doing it for the clout, or whatever the reason is, the fake reason, they will get burnt out eventually, and you're going to see them starting to phase out, and the results not transpiring from the athletes, or athletes leaving them and stuff like that. Um, I love what I do. That's why I do it. And I think the hardest thing for me is I have to step down from bodybuilding, and that was a really depressing thing for me, was completely stepping down from bodybuilding, because I felt like I was a pretty good bodybuilder, especially on my prime. Even with all the injuries and stuff like that, I feel like I was still pretty solid. And knowing that I'm probably never going to have the opportunity to step on a stage again, because I have people like Damien at the Arnold this year, and Kyla, and then I have junior essays and junior now, and it doesn't stop. It's a whole season year round, until you have 1 month off at the end of the year, and then you start back up again. But you technically have people in prep. Like as soon as Olympia was on, Damien was told that he was in the Arnold. So I immediately had someone in prep again. And I had someone in, like, I got a pro card right after the Arnold too. So it was like the season doesn't end. And I think that's one of the harder things for a athlete that is also coaching to be able to understand, is eventually you do need to take a step back to focus on only the athletes rather than yourself. But you have to take care of yourself too. And that's the thing that I was going to post about, is you cannot take care of anyone else until you take care of yourself first. So making sure that you're in a good mental state is extremely important, and being a fundamental rock and piece that they can trust and rely on, just like any relationship, that you're a stability point for them rather than a point that's falling apart. That's why it's so hard to prep for a show. Now, I was good when I prepped for my show, and I still have the client load that I did, until like 3 weeks out, and I got a virus, and I literally physically couldn't walk. I still peaked someone at 2 a.m. in the morning that was over in Japan the 2 weeks out from my show. So it's not like I wasn't doing my job,
Yeah.
but most people don't really function like I do. And I'll say that it still isn't easy. Not being able to physically do and physically have the energy that you need to allocate to every single person to get them to their goals, is more of a deterrent factor for me to have to get back to stage, if that makes sense. Because I would love to go back on stage. I just don't know if it's ever going to happen again.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point in perspective, especially for those who are active in competing and then got into coaching. Generally, there is that step back where it's like, okay, I can only manage so much. And then I think you made a good point too, though. Even when you were competing, you still were able to manage it. I think that a lot of the times when like if you've been working since a very young age and you're used to working and nonstop, like generally, I think you can almost manage that type of stress maybe better than someone who only started working uh, later in life potentially, and maybe doesn't have that resilience or endurance for it. So I think it's manageable, but like you said, especially when you're growing such a big roster and team, and then these are high level athletes, high caliber athletes too, that require so much of your attention. And when you had mentioned that the season never ends, that's a great point. So coaches are generally always on. And then you said you got to be able to pour into them and not so much take away from yourself in that process. So you said you haven't been training for a while, or as often as you would like to, because you've been working so much. Um, do you pour into yourself in other ways? I know in your intro we talked about like video games and your wife. Like, how else are you pouring in if it's not training?
Unfortunately, I don't really have time for much. So I pour myself into my studies. I read a lot of medical studies. It's funny, people ask me like, yeah, where can I learn this information? It's like, I mean, the hundreds of thousands of studies that I've read through, like I just pieced the puzzles together over time. I was really self-taught predominantly, for the most part, because I just love it. It's fun to me. Like if I'm up late at night, I'm probably reading at least one scientific article per night. Or
Yeah.
I accidentally started reading a biochem book the 2 weeks back or 3 weeks back. I forgot what it was. I was diving into like gonadotropin releasing hormone and women's menstrual cycles and inhibiting hormones and stuff like that.
Huh.
And I went down this rabbit hole and I somehow ended up starting to read a biochem book. I never took biochem in my entire life, or maybe it was OChem. It was OChem. It was an OChem book. Um, and I was just like, oh, this is a really good scientific article. And I was like, wait, I'm reading an OChem book right now. But it was really
Dude,
so
OChem is traumatizing.
I thought it was interesting. It's definitely daunting because there's so many things in play is
Exactly.
the daunting thing. But I think when you have been going down the rabbit hole for so long and into a granular level, you start piecing the puzzle pieces together more. So you're like, oh, this is really interesting. X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z. Start like ping ponging, right? So it
Yeah.
gets you like wired and geeked out even more. But honestly, it's mainly focused around like my studies more so than anything else. And then I had the kid along the way. So I know Caroline's been asking me like, "Are you excited for the kid?" I was like, "I'm very excited." Um, and nervous, but excited because I know that I'm not planning. I don't even think about it because I know that when she's here, I'm just going to, every single day is going to be a different day. So why would I focus on what I don't know yet? I'm going to have to change diapers. I'll probably have some more late nights, which I already have late nights, and life will change a little bit. But, I just kind of like roll with the flow. Um, the saying that I live life by is life's like a river. You're gonna just go with the flow, and there's gonna be pebbles along the way, there's gonna be boulders along the way, but it keeps flowing on. So I just kind of go with it and make sure that I am able to function more so than anything else at at least a high enough rate to where I can give back as much knowledge as I can before I'm no longer here on this planet. And because I don't know when that day is going to come, so I just want to continue pushing myself as long as I can, because by the time I'm 40 something years old, I will not have the energy to do what I'm doing right now.
How old are you right now?
I'm 31, just turned 30.
Okay. Okay. You're like, I still got a lot of time. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I still have a lot of time. Everyone tells me that. They're like, wait, you're young. I was like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, not that you don't look old either. I just wasn't sure how old you were, but yeah, it's interesting. Actually, so much of what you said I can really relate to. So going back to your first point about like reading and studying and pouring into yourself that way, whenever I have people ask you like, what books do you recommend for binging? And I'm like, you know how much schoolwork I've done to be able to do what I do? Like, I wish there was a book that I could be like, this is the solution. And some books out there, I think people get good insight from, but I'm like, it's a very collective effort. So I've read so much that's gone into this. I've done literal schooling, like a master's degree, but that was everything I did was applied. So I was finding this and my whole purpose in that was to support this industry with it. So there was so much reading. I didn't even have time to read a book about binging, let alone trust that it would have the level of knowledge I've poured into my own development. And then, you also talked about how there's life and the river. I liked that analogy a lot. I felt like there's been many times in my life where I've just hit boulders with I'm like, oh no, get back up from this. Is this the end of the river? Because that boulder, I'm looking around, I don't see any more flowing water. But you're right, like somehow we get through it. And I think as coaches or mentors, like for me as a counselor or mentor, and for you as a coach, it's really cool that we can take our own personal experiences and our education and utilize that to best support someone, whether that's through like an anecdote about our own life and story or through the work that we've done too.
Yeah, one of my favorite things is when you're talking about reading and studying and stuff like that. When I read like these mainstream books from these doctors and stuff like that, that have really good information in there, I will rip it a new one. Every single paragraph I hear, I'm like, well, context matters. And then I'll
Exactly.
saying this, but this is actually what you need to know that adds the context that makes this
Mm,
true. But this statement is true, but there's a lot more context that makes this statement potentially invalid for certain cases.
exactly.
And so you just completely rip it apart, and it's really hard to read a book because you just need to know the facts. You don't want to know what someone's perception is of a situation. And that's what you get is you get the perception of the frame of mind that that person's in when they wrote that book or what points they're trying to get across. And that's the hard thing when it comes to like social media now is its frame of reference in mind and cherry picking studies and cherry picking X, Y, and Z to get a point across. And I will rip it a new one. And I usually keep it kind of to myself. But
Mhm.
needless to say, it it adds for intellectual conversation and for society and close friends to get together to continue to push to become better. And that's
Mhm.
also, I think, why I also say if you can keep one person in a circle every 2 years, you're doing pretty good because that's someone that can help you progress in life and that you're progressing in life with.
Hmm.
So it's very uncommon that you can find someone that will continue to help you push you down the path of your passion, maybe even outside of your passion too.
I really like that perspective. And it also goes hand in hand with what you said earlier about like not being driven by money, but instead by how much you can give and offer. I had an interesting conversation with someone, and I won't name names here, but like they were really trying to push me to make more money off of that. How are you making money off your podcast? And what are you? I'm like, it's about my like coach, my services. Like I guide people that, but this is about impact. And they were like, well, you can make a bigger impact with more money. I'm like, that's true, but like that's not the driving factor. Like for me, the impact is first. And I think there's an unfortunate truth, which is that a lot of people are more driven by money. And I think that's why sometimes we see this fast road being taken in this industry too, of like, let me go as fast as possible to that end result, or let me scale as fast as possible just because then I can accrue more money. But then we miss out or forget the purpose of why it was even started. So I think people with that passion, like you said, you came back to the industry. It wasn't like you were in it and then you're like, oh, I'm just gonna, make something out of this. You went to IT and then you came back. So I think that says a lot about your commitment. And maybe you could even share like some of the common misconceptions that people have about this sport when they come to you for coaching. Like, do you hear any common misconceptions?
So people that are already in the sport, I find that PTSD is a real thing. So they have a bad coaching experience or a bad prep and they start reliving those traumas. So getting people past those traumas is actually a pretty common thing. Some people actually just can't get through it ever again through another prep because of how bad that experience was, which I've had Olympia caliber genetics in my hands and I can't get them over their previous traumas. It's been very uncommon. I can't do it, but there's been at least like two people off the top of my head I can think about that literally could be like top five in the world. And I can't get them past their traumas from a previous prep experience, whether it being in the coaching or just like how they perceive that prep. Um, so some misconceptions about bodybuilding is bodybuilding should be a plus in your life, not a negative. I think that people view it as a net negative because of the lack of energy that you have in a prep. Now, if a prep is done properly, it should be pretty enjoyable for the most part. Should you be tired and maybe a little bit moody because you are more tired and you can't, and it's more of a frustration point that you can't allocate energy towards your loved ones and there's certain things that you want to do. That's a more frustrating thing. So you might get snappy. So understanding that that's a real thing. But you should be pretty much tired and hungry in a prep. You shouldn't feel sick in a prep. Being sick is not normal in bodybuilding. And I wish it's something that I knew sooner. Uh, Even in an off season, you shouldn't always constantly have like a bloated looking face. You might obviously body fat and stuff like that, but like bloated looking face, distended stomachs. If you're not pregnant, you shouldn't look pregnant. That's probably bacterial overgrowth or something else going on. Those are all things that can be fixed. There's people with knowledge out there that can fix that. And that's honestly why I came back into the sport was women's health more than anything else. was there was a lack of knowledge in this industry. And eventually you were talking about money. My goal is to continually give free education. Everything I make, I spend back on like my social media. People think I'm on it a lot more than I am. I comment obviously back to everyone or try to and DM everyone back personally, but um I literally have pretty much a social media company that I spend money on to continually give free education. And I am building out basically mentorship privately with my own coaches on my team, as well as a courses that I'm going to be rolling out privately with my coaches. Probably what I'll eventually do when I'm on the back end of whatever, or I just want to do it. I'll probably roll that out for free at some point in time, just because I want people to be able to get a university education that can't get university educations. And there's a lot of things in university that we should learn that we don't learn.
Mhm.
Like my background was in IT. I wish I went to school for medical school. I wouldn't go back for medical school because of what I know now, but I can give back in the way that I am. So that's, I think, the big thing. And building a community, a positive community in the bodybuilding space is extremely important. And people forget that when you're at a show backstage, most people are pretty friendly. Make friends backstage because you're going to be seeing them again, especially at these national shows. You're going to be seeing them again. You remember that there's only a few pro cards giving out a national show. Make friends. That's the number one thing that I think that I see people living their regrets with is they think that it's filled with drama. This world's only filled with as much drama as you allow it to be filled with. It is, most people are pretty similar to each other. They want to live a happy, healthy life, and they want to have a sense of collection of relationships and a network.
Mhm.
It's very simple animal needs that people forget about. So make friends along the way. And people are working lots of hours to be able to be in the sport just like everyone else.
Yes. Yes. You can relate so much more than not. And I think we miss a big opportunity to connect and form really great friendships with other crazy people backstage if we just shut ourselves down. And I mean, we saw this, I mean, every seminar or every show, or even just this, like I said, the women's workshop, like going to that, it's like you just see so many people connect. You could show up alone. There were people who showed up alone, but it's like there was that sense of belonging, and you just understand each other and it's comfortable. And I love how you said you want to emphasize education and community because I think although education isn't immunity, it's certainly insight and it lends beneficial when you're considering what you're doing or what your options are or where you're going to take things. It's nice to have that knowledge. So, and then obviously, hopefully, you have it going through a filtration system that's clean so you can apply it properly. But yeah, I want to ask you this too. What do you have to say to the people who say politics with teams plays a role in their clients' placing, or that all of this is political?
All right. So it doesn't matter to be on a big team, and do politics matter or exist? And the answer is politics are bullshit. And this is just the blunt, honest truth behind it. First, 100% of my athletes that turned pro last year, the judges had no clue who they were. They weren't even actually on regional stages. They were qualified from the year before and they turned pro. That day, the judges didn't know who they were. They talked to the judges after the show. The only thing I would say that weighs is if a judge recognizes you, it may allow you to get a call out if there's 30 other people in that class and they recognized you and they liked your look from a previous show and they're like, oh yeah, I really like their look. They actually improved what I said them. They might shift you in, right? That's where it helps you out. There are also certain judges that have a preference towards a certain look. For instance, some judges may prefer over conditioning, or some judges may prefer structural um, flow more than other judges, or some judges might prefer a little bit more muscle mass. And that's where it matters the most, is making sure you're in front of the right judges that prefer whatever is your best look to bring to the stage. But at the end of the day, it's bringing your best look. And paying to sponsor a show, all that that's doing is it's supporting the sport. People think it magically gets you a better placement, or signing on with a certain coach is going to get you the best placement. You know what's funny about that? The people that have the number one people in the world pretty much don't sponsor a show, or if they do, it's a local show to support a local person. So, no, politics don't exist. It's not I scratch your back, you scratch my back. That stuff is stupid. Sometimes at regional levels, you see some stuff that shouldn't exist. I've been, unfortunately, someone that has had that experience because they didn't want to pay for my hotel fees. But, I'm never going to even talk about that because all that I do was congratulate the guy that won. And
Yeah.
there was nothing against the guy. It just is what it is. And, there's been some stuff that has happened in the sport that people don't always agree with. There was a big debate between Hottie versus Derek. I was sitting there in person. Anyone that I was with had Derek in first place and Hottie in second place. Hottie was way softer from the backside than Derek.
Hmm.
Derek, I had losing potentially one pose, if not, if I wanted to be gracious, two poses to Hottie. Was that political? No. Did he win the previous year? Yes. Was that racist? No. We haven't had an American win in a while. So,
Exactly.
I think it's just drama that people want to perceive in their heads, coming for rationale why they're not placing where they feel like they should place, or where their friends are placing them, or where their coach wants to place them.
Hmm.
So I shake hands if a coach beats my athlete on stage. I'm like, hell yeah, it was good to share the stage with you again, man. You guys killed it. That's it. And then you come back better. And if the coach is going to make excuses for not bringing you in better to the next stage, you need to find a new coach, because they're not owning up to the fact that you should come in better to the next stage. Why? Because you're going to have time in between the next stage anyway. So make the improvements. Don't dread on the past. Be like, all right, cool. Well, this is why that person beat you. Who cares about why that person beat you? We're just going to come in better anyways. We're going to come back with bigger, fuller glutes because we have some time to build some muscle tissue, and we're going to bring the same amount of conditioning. The judges like that conditioning. Let's bring it back. I would always caution, and this is another thing that I think is an issue. I would always caution more on being over conditioned rather than under conditioned, because you never know what the judges are going to pick that day.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so true. And I even heard through the grapevine recently that they're making some more changes to the judging panels where they're gonna reduce the ability for anyone who's a coach in the industry to judge. I think they might be grandfathering it in for those who are already, and they're not gonna allow for people who do what's that? They said something else, but I know they said coaches for sure. And then there was some other criteria. Now, granted, most of the judges I've spoken to will already excuse themselves from the table if they do have an athlete on stage. But there are some who don't, or who it goes, that way. But luckily with the NPC and IFBB, they do throw out the highest and lowest scores, which I think can reduce some of that impact. But I know they're making even more strides to manage for that possible bias too.
So it was always that a coach cannot judge their client. What they have done, at least I know, because Caroline wanted to be a judge, because I coach, she can't judge. She was also an active competitor, so they would not let her judge. So
Yeah. Oh, that was the other feedback. Yeah, you can't be actively competing in the league that you're judging, basically.
yeah, they denied that way before they came out with that rule, though, interestingly
That's
enough.
good.
So they were definitely at least strict for us on who could judge and who couldn't judge. Um, but it was always supposed to be the rule that if your coach was on that judging panel, they weren't allowed to judge you, and they're supposed to excuse themselves from the panel. I don't think it always happened, but I think they're really
Yeah.
strict about it now. But for the most part, they would, from my understanding. So
Yeah, I've always found that interesting because I'm like, well, then doesn't it become an even amount of scorecards potentially, or does someone else step down too? So they still get that odd number to throw out. So it's very fascinating. But I think the point we're making here is that they do the best that they can to reduce it. And a lot of the people I've connected with who are promoters or judges, like they make it very clear too, like they're there to make you better. So they're generally judging as realistically as possible because they're also controlling for the sport.
Yeah.
If they just handed it out to people like for political reasons, they would lose control over the actual criteria of the sport, I think, more than anything. It would lose a lot of its integrity.
Yeah, and I made a statement earlier this year and it got a lot of heat, right? Like people thought I was hating on athletes for winning their classes, and I was not. In fact, I congratulated the coach and the athlete on winning. It didn't even have to do with my athlete. I just think that certain judging panels have better eyes than other judging panels. Period. End of story. Why? Why would you not be on the Olympia judging panel if you were an Olympia judge? You'll pay your dues, and it takes time to get a good enough eye to end up on that stage. Now I'm sure that there's like spots have to open up for you to get on there eventually, but I'm sure that you'll be on a judging panel, like the practice panel at the Olympia
Yeah.
stage if they're grooming you to be an Olympia judge, right? And they're gonna have you do test scores. So there's a test that you take before you become a national judge, and there's a test I'm sure that you take before you become an Olympia judge. So certain countries I think don't have as good of eyes. Now, sometimes they take actually the like some Olympia judges and they'll actually send them overseas
Yes.
like that to judge for the bigger pro shows, which is great. And they try to do the best of their ability there. But like maybe some of the national shows that are overseas that you have international judges rather than domestic judges, the domestic judges tend to have better eyes. Maybe just because there's better competition over here,
Hmm.
maybe that's it, so they're used to seeing a certain look, and that's the look that is the gold standard. So I personally think that, and this is the statement that I made, I would love to see international judges have to come to national shows or pro shows and do practice judging and writing down test scores so they get better eyes. It makes the sport better as a whole, and that's something that I would love to see. I don't think that they make them do it, but I would love to see them do it because it would make the sport better as a whole. At least the ones that are the head judges that are sitting in seats 2 and 3, like 1, 2, and 3, those judges, the real head judges, those I do believe should be sitting on national and pro panels within the US to obtain a better eye long term.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that statement. I mean, we want people to be able to have consistency, and that helps athletes have clarity and coaches have clarity. Now, what do you think? Because we talked a little bit about responsibility here too, like you got to be able to bring something better. So, what do you think is the difference between a good athlete and then a phenomenal winning champion athlete?
That's funny because some of the best athletes in the world are also the worst athletes in the world. It's so
Why?
okay.
Because it's a genetic sport or what?
Yeah, so the best athletes in the world execute. They don't ask questions, but they also give you the feedback that you need instead of leaving stuff ambiguous, right? What I find very common is the really good athletes, you kind of have to try to pull information out of them a little bit more than some of the athletes that you're building from the ground up. And it's probably more from a conditioning standpoint that you can condition the athletes earlier on and
Mhm.
group them into the athletes that you would like them to be more so than anything else. So I think it's more like just conditioning the reps in the tank kind of thing. It doesn't have to do with not being coachable. In fact, the best athletes in the world are the most coachable athletes in the world. Sometimes you don't even know that they exist and they're on the face of the planet. You have to ask for proof of life. So why? Because they're executing, they're being the amazing athletes
Exactly.
that they are. You just have to make sure that you're the guiding hand and that you're being responsible in watching them during the process. So consistency are the best athletes in the world. They put in the work, they execute the plan, they don't really ask many questions. With that comes, as the coach, asking the right questions so you can make the right decisions for them to get them to the goals.
Hmm, like
Yeah.
that. That makes sense. I like that. So, I'm gonna ask you some hypotheticals now. So, if I'm a year into competing, but I've done really well, I've got a few overall wins under my belt, and my goal is now to go get my pro card, but I've not yet stepped on a national stage. And I've been working with the same coach for this year, but I was looking for a new approach. Why would I hire you?
The funny thing is, if someone was to ask me that question, I'd say, why are you leaving your coach? if they're doing well with you. Like I
Yeah.
wouldn't, I'd straight up ask them like, why are you even approaching me right now? Like they've executed well. Your look has been good too. Like, why would you want a new approach? And that's a question back for the athlete. I wouldn't even want to take them on as an athlete. Why? Because your coach is killing it with you. If you're killing it with them, like what makes you say that you're not going to leave me later on down the road? First off, because I think they're doing a good job with you. Like, are you not healthy or something like that? I'd ask some further questions along the lines of that. Um, I've had I've done consultations with people that felt like their guts were messed up, and I'm like, all right, well, you have to let your coach know if we're going to do it because I want them in the loop, and I don't like working behind anyone's back. So I'm very transparent with other coaches and like athletes that your coach needs to be looped in. I don't want to be viewed as the guy scouting athletes or anything like that because I don't communicate, I don't reach out to athletes. I never will, never have. Um, People reach out to me, but I will be very transparent with them. If a coach is doing a good job with you, a lot of times the grass is not greener on the other side. If there is doubt that they can't get you to your goals for whatever reason, that is something that you probably need to talk to the coach about beforehand before looking for another coach. And if you decide that that is not what you need to hear, it wasn't even close to what you need to hear, and you communicated that and why, well, that's something different. And a lot of people don't have confidence that certain coaches can bring them to certain levels.
Mhm.
And that is because they have not been there in the past and they may never be there in the future. And if that's the doubt, then that's a different story. The coaches that win over and over again.
Yeah. So that actually brings up another interesting point that hasn't been asked, but now I'm kind of curious given you said that, which is if coaches who win generally continue to win, but there's new coaches all the time, how would someone know if that coach maybe has that winning coach potential, even if they don't have a track record yet?
Well, that was me. I was just doing stuff behind the scenes for years, so I had a lot of reps in the tank. But I got the opportunity. It only takes one opportunity to execute, and the first opportunity I had, I didn't even put a national competitor up on stage yet. And they took their place at their pro show, and it was in a division that I didn't know, which was bikini. I knew literally nothing about bikini, and I fixed their health and their physique in a short time frame, and word of mouth started spreading. And then the first national competitor put up on stage, went pro. So I got my opportunities finally, and I executed. And that's what life's about is
Mhm.
what's practiced in public or what's celebrated in public is practiced in private for thousands of hours, and then you execute. It's like it's when the opportunity presents itself, freaking execute. And then if you can't execute, that's on you. And that's okay. That means that you weren't ready for that opportunity yet. And that just means that you need more reps in the tank. So people feel like they always get the short end of the stick and that they're not presented the right opportunity or the right athlete. You can build great athletes. And I build great athletes. I enjoy building great athletes from the ground up. And a lot of coaches, they get great athletes that are already at the top. That I don't feel like takes as much skill. Now, taking a great athlete that's like number 5 in the world, and then like in 1 year they're number 1 in the world, that's phenomenal. That's amazing. That's crazy to see.
Yeah.
So, and it does happen. Like there are people that do. I mean, shoot, Pawnee made Chris Bumstead better in 1 year, and it was pretty immaculate to see in person, like the jump from 1 year to the next year. And when he came out on stage, before he even had a pose, I was like, I don't know if this can get any better. And I
And
happen to
then
sit
it's
next to Ariel, who's cuts, who has like more men's physique pros than probably anyone else in the world.
yeah.
And I like turned to him, I'm like, dude, I don't know what I'm gonna be looking at if this gets better than this. And it was his first year with Hani, and I was just like mind blowing. It was absolutely phenomenal, like the changes that they made. And Chris was already killing it. Ian was doing a great job with him. I was actually very surprised when he left. Um, but it had to do with the fact that Ian, I think, was still competing or something like that.
Mhm.
Either way, that's my stance there is a great coach will eventually have great athletes, whether it's today or whether it's down the road. It has nothing to do with anything else other than paying your dues. And when you get the opportunity, you present you and you're presented with it, you execute. There was a bikini pro last year that I got that was 18th place at a show. And I actually fixed her menstrual cycle and everything like that coming out. It was literally like for more of the medical stuff. I fixed her gut, fixed her menstrual cycle, and I kept feeding her more and more food, and she just kept getting leaner. And all of a sudden I was like, do you want to pick a show out? This is like a really weird statement. But do you want to just pick one out just for fun? I was like, like, I don't mean to do anything with you. Like, you're doing no cardio, you're doing 10,000 steps a day, you're eating
Mhm.
300 grams of carbs and like 70 grams of fat, and you're dropping body fat. I'm like, and they're like, yeah, sure. They're like, 6 weeks out, is that far enough? I was like, I need less time than that, but sure. And she ended up going from 18th place to 6th place, and it was 3 months. I fixed her gut, fixed her hormones, and she got 6th place. So 12 places improvements in a much more competitive show. It was at Legion Sports Festival. So
Mhm.
um just being able to execute. That's it.
Well, there's so much that I could say to that. I mean, one, I think it speaks to the point that a lot of people will see someone and think it was an overnight success. Like, I was speaking on stage, and people were like, "Have you done this for?" I'm like, "I've been doing this since I was 19. I am 27, y'all. Like, there's a reason I went up there and did what I did. Like, it's not, it's just when you, like you said, you take opportunities, you capitalize on them, and like that's how you get in those spaces as well. And I had friends who were like, it's funny, some people think this is your like made it moment, but you're the one, like there's a reason you're up there, you know? And I was like, exactly, just like there's a reason you're able to take an athlete and get them a result like that. So second thing I want to say to that, that really speaks to the importance of gut health and hormone function. So like was the ability to process that amount of food and do that little amount of cardio or movement a result of their previously struggling gut situation? And were the hormones connected to that as well?
So PEDs take hormones. So hormones were null and void. But that's going to happen with most women, even off of PEDs, their hormones are going to completely tank out. So fixing hormones alone is going to usually increase metabolic rate to some extent. And then when you improve someone's thyroid function, because the gut is directly correlated with hormones as well as thyroid, and you reduce down the inflammation, everything just works better. So 100% yes, I've seen this time and time again where they can handle more food or they need less food to fill out. So it's like less loading, less water manipulation. Why? Because they're not retaining all this water from a poor digestive system.
Mhm.
And I will say that it's more of an anomaly that they can eat as much food as they are. It's not very common, but I have had bikini competitors that are eating 300 plus grams of carbs. It's not nothing like crazy that I haven't ever seen. They might be eating low amounts of food and then eventually you're eating that. And it's not because they're on thyroid hormone either. They're just eating more food. Um, I will say that bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, as far as thyroid is related, sometimes you need to get them out of hypo ranges. It doesn't mean that you need to replace the thyroid. It may just mean that you need to pull them slightly out of the ranges, not shutting down a thyroid, but pulling them up a little bit. And that's also something with experience and time, and also knowing that data isn't always what translates. So sometimes you see someone functioning with a low thyroid, but for some reason it's on paper low, but in relativity, their metabolic rate's pretty high. I've also seen very high functioning thyroids, and really it's functioning lower. Their metabolic rate's very slow. So it's not common, but you do see it. But making sure that a woman's not feeling depressed, their sleep's good, their hair's not falling out, things like that. That's all thyroid related. So yes, to answer your question, hormones and gut did make a massive difference because they were eating way over double what they were eating before. And they were doing no carb, their natural. I was forcing them to do their natural steps in a day. Like they were doing literally, I was forcing them to do less natural steps in a day because they were so active naturally. So yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So that's so insightful because I think a lot of times those things get overlooked, especially when it comes to female competitors. Sometimes we're just so used to our bodies changing so much throughout our life too that we don't catch some things as well. Like before I treated my SIBO, I used to have like a way more like bloated face look. Like this, I was like, this was literally not that long ago in my improvement season, and I didn't realize it until we treated him. I was like, wait, now I get it. Like I gotta get it more. I didn't notice, like, but I didn't notice because I just like lived like that, you know? So it's interesting how much we just kind of get used to the status quo and we don't dig deeper. So it's important, I think, to have a coach who's like, hey, I'm thinking we should maybe look into this, or are you experiencing this? A woman's like, I'm a woman. Of course I'm depressed and anxious and struggling in this way. You're like, supposed to be.
But really, you're not.
Right.
Like you should be way more sane. Like you should not feel menopause symptoms when you're in your 20s or your 30s. Um, Premenopause, I'm gonna get so much heat for this because it is a medical condition. Premenopause is a made up condition, and it just means that your hormones aren't where they need to be. So you can optimize all that stuff. And there are some people that do actually have some type of pathwaying issue that may need to be addressed medically, and those people actually do need medical intervention. Most of the stuff can be fixed naturally, though.
Okay. So, next hypothetical. Your client comes to you and says they've rebounded after their show and they just want to reverse it and get back to normal. What do you do?
Most of my athletes actually get a pretty big calorie bump because I know from a mental standpoint, I'd rather them be eating more clean foods than just eating out every single day and feeding probably bacteria overgrowth from all the bad oils that they're eating.
Mm.
So I usually crank up the calories pretty high and I also give them 2 free meals a week. From a mental standpoint, that tends to work well. And then I will throttle back the food when they start feeling like they're eating too much food, because that will happen in a very short period of time because the stomach is usually shrunk up. But getting them back to a good cognitive state. But I implement things like natural nootropics, things to improve sleep levels, things to improve thyroid functionality, all the things that downregulated and downregulated, I almost said degraded. Everything that downregulated during prep, whether it be adrenal function, or hormone function. I improve with supplementation usually, take the edge off of it, and I implement the nootropics to help with mood support. That it's usually adrenal related more so than anything else, but to improve your neurotransmitter function to the best of my ability. Dopaminic urgency, which we were just talking about, is the big one, especially because your gut, your motility, is going to reduce down from your thyroid. It's also most likely going to be in a bad spot. So it's a really bad time to eat poorly because you reduce down your bacteria from eating such low amounts of food. That dopamine and serotonin predominantly are created in your gut. So you want to talk about being depressed post show? Go and have a bunch of cheesecake over the next several days and see how depressed you feel and bloated you feel. And then you'll talk about feeling depressed because you have no dopaminic urgency. You have very low serotonin production because you're completely messing up your microbiota in your gut.
Yeah, and even just psychologically, you've gone from being on point with your plan to suddenly now you're making decisions that you haven't been used to making and acting on urges that you didn't act on. So you're completely depleting that ability to push through difficulties, which dopamine and norepinephrine support. So if you're unable to regulate for those things, now what you're running into is I no longer can sustain the hard thing, nor do I want to. And it doesn't mean you're a bad athlete all of a sudden or you're not capable of it. There's just things that have to be adjusted to essentially reset. And that's why I always tell my girls, I'm like, it's okay to take a step back and reset and almost do the basics to rebuild that, because you're rebuilding more than, oh, I'm a terrible athlete, I have to prove myself. It's not just that. There's a lot more that goes into it. So I actually really like your approach too, and more of like that recovery after and pushing them up, because I think it could probably prevent a lot of that.
100%. Selecting the right fats is really important too. One thing that I find very common is that people have pretty high histamine intolerances. So selecting the right foods, maybe lower histamine foods, is also important because there's some really good high high FODMAP, which is okay to an extent, and high histamine foods that are super healthy. They're considered superfoods, but coming out of a show are really bad selection of foods.
Like what?
But everyone's different there. Like some people will tolerate it perfectly fine. For instance, like avocado
Uh-huh.
might close up someone's lungs post show because you're having a severe histamine intolerance to it because it's a super high histamine.
Huh.
That's just like one example, right? Tomatoes, another superfood, right? Great for our hearts, very high histamine. It's
What
also a
if you were
nightshade,
eating
so on
that?
paper, it's like toxic to the body. It's like, don't get me wrong, it's not toxic to the body, but
Right.
it nonetheless it's considered a nightshade, and but it is a high histamine. So another thing, people might have wine post show or alcohol post show, and they're having allergic reactions to it. Like, like things like that are very real that people actually do, I never actually heard anyone talk about it, but like it's a very
Yeah.
common thing that I see.
I think that's so great to talk about it because that's like the physiological stuff that I don't personally care to get into necessarily because it's not my passion. And I leave it up to people like you who are passionate about it. However, hearing you say that as well, I was thinking, okay, well, what happens if you've been eating, like, let's say you fed into your show and you were eating those things too. Like, at what point are you saying that someone's gut maybe is in a state where they're more vulnerable? You said it was when they're depleted or when they haven't been eating very much, but what if they were maybe like that one client you mentioned, like eating into the show, eating a high amount of food? Is that different?
I'll be honest with you, people's guts are going to be bad no matter what. And that's why like I hate when people are like, you're dying. It's like, look, like let their gut balance out a little bit post show. And then like if you want to run GI mapping or something like that, you can. I had to run mine almost immediately because like I literally looked pregnant post show and I wasn't eating bad or anything. I was literally eating on diet, but I could hardly eat food. And I was like I almost ripped through my diastasis recti surgery. Like I had
Oh
surgery to stitch
no.
myself up. And I felt it like almost wanting to rip back open. I was so distended. I'll post the picture at some point in time. I
Yeah.
posted a long time ago. But I was like depressed. I only took one picture because I was in so much pain. I felt like my
Yeah.
stomach was about to rip back open. Um,
Man.
so your gut's going to be in a bad spot. You're in a high stress state. You're not digesting food as well as you normally would. You're taking stimulants, which, by the way, I'm not demonizing stimulants. Stimulants is a great tool to get you through a show. Use it when you need it. End of story. Don't blast them when you don't need to.
Right.
Um, most people feel better with less stimulants than more, and selecting the right stimulants is very important. But that's also going to affect and quote unquote dry up your intestines if you want to look at it like that, because stimulants are going to make you urinate more. So more water is needed. So just make sure you're hydrating. And with more hydration requires more sodium as well. So these are all things that like will affect guts. Um, if you're eating good amounts of food, most likely because the high stress environment, you're having to reduce down your palate a lot anyways. So you're continuously blasting the same enzymes over and over again so that you're you still don't have a great microbiota balance. Probiotics aren't going to fix this. Prebiotics are only going to do so much. The best source of bacteria for your gut is food. And that's why, like, I just there's someone that's really famous for gut health, and they put it. Ironically enough, they started following. I was like, I'm surprised they started following me, but um, they put a post up about probiotics. And I go, probiotics is probably not even on my top 10 list for good things for your gut because
Yeah.
it has to be so targeted to what probiotic you need. And it's the prebiotics that are going to start building up that bacteria because you pre, pro, and post biotics. So it's really nothing replaces the food post show. Enjoy yourself for 24 to 48 hours. Don't go ham on sugars. Enjoy foods, enjoy whole foods, have some vegetables in there for the fibers. Asparagus is a good one for prebiotics. People tend to tolerate it really well besides your pee. You,
Yeah.
you need to call the CDC for your urine. It smells so bad. Um, and that's kind of where I'd leave it. I don't want to really go on a long tangent, but your gut's not going to be in a good place no matter who you are.
I like that perspective a lot because I think when you finally look at something, then it makes it seem like there's a magnifying glass on it. But when you didn't look at it, it didn't exist before. So when the industry shines light on something, suddenly it's like everybody's problem, but no one cared about it before and it wasn't affecting anybody before.
No, and it's like there's certain like medical drug applications that I could introduce into the bodybuilding space that are freaking awesome. And I will never do it because people are like, more is more. It's like there's like anti-addiction drugs that still bind to the same receptors as the drug itself that are super healthy in low amounts. And then, of course, in this sport, people are going to be like,
Abuse
I
it.
heard about this drug. David talked about this. And all of a sudden, people are just ruined and like drug addicts. I'm just like,
Literally.
and that's why I started keeping my mouth shut. It's like people just like go to an extreme. It's like, look, like less is more for the majority of this stuff. Um, Sometimes less cardio is more cardio. Like something simple
Mhm.
as that. Like reducing down stress load may make you recover more, but it may also reducing down that cardio may make you walk more in a day or fidget more in a day, and you're burning more calories through NEAT. So like
Exactly.
eating more food may make you burn more calories in a day because you're literally doing more activity. So there is a double-edged sword with everything.
Yeah, it's so like you said, it's context and it's so specific to each athlete. Like I know when I got refeeds in, even though I was like not, I was very depleted, and then I'd get a refeed. My workouts, I was freaking crushing it. I had the energy to do more. I was like, where do I want to go? Like that's how I was feeling. And then over time, it like, duh, 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 but then it happens again. So, like, as an athlete, it's definitely true. Like, okay, this is like something I noticed. And I was talking to a massage therapist I had back in the day. Like, you look at basketball players, like pro basketball players, they all walk around the same way, don't they? Like, they're kind of hunched over, they're like dragging feet, like they're dragging, but they don't want to walk. They're not expending all this energy. I think as an athlete, whether you're doing this sport or you've been an athlete for your whole life, like there is this almost like a biological desire to preserve energy so you can be explosive when you need to be. And I think we see that obviously through competing because we're manipulating so much of our food and energy resources. But yeah, anytime I see athletes, I like notice that we're generally preserving energy.
But I just want to throw out that bodybuilders are the laziest athletes in the world. Like straight up, they're like, oh, I don't want to do cardio because I'm going to burn too many calories and then I'm not going to grow.
Literally.
I'm just like, if you do some cardio, it's good for your cardiovascular respiratory system, your cardiovascular system, and you're going to actually grow more muscle tissue. Did you know that? Like, that's a
But that doesn't,
fact.
but then it's like, oh, but well, yeah. Yeah. So, but then it's confusing because in bodybuilding, it's like, well, calories in, calories out, and save your energy. And so there's so many nuances that come into play, but we attach to those extremes because they're predictable.
You're burning so few calories during a lifting session. You're burning so few calories in a cardio session. Like, it requires so much cardio, like so many steps to burn a lot of calories that people don't even know what it feels like to burn a lot of calories. Sit there and burn 1,000 calories and see how good you feel afterwards. Like you're gonna be like dead.
Yeah, I want everyone who struggles with eating more in their improvement season to rewind that and press play again because that honestly, like it, a lot of people who struggle to slow down in their improvement season, like to actually eat more and move less, it's like they're worried that they're not going to burn enough calories to like to basically keep themselves from gaining an excessive fat. It's like if you're working with the right coach, you're doing the right thing, or even some of the maybe more anorexic presenting type of mindsets will really, really try to eat as little as possible for the most amount. And while that can be somewhat conducive mindset for this sport, it can also be not so great because then you're hung up on this belief that you're actually burning all these calories through movement and you're really not. The total daily energy expenditure is not coming that much from our lifts. So people try to work things off or do it. It's like that crazy mentality that, we work so hard to prevent.
Yeah, and I think another thing is this is my favorite thing about bikini, by the way. 800 calorie diets. I just want to throw this one out there. That's you're only eating protein. It's not a ketogenic diet. In fact, there's a process the body goes through called gluconeogenesis, where it converts protein, which is actually usually muscle tissue, into carbohydrates to be able to have ATP production and function in a day in the life. It's a survival mechanism the body has. So your body's probably not even kicking into ketogenesis because gluconeogenesis is going on. So it's actually a starvation diet and your body's trying to survive. You don't need to be eating 800 calories to get in shape. Again, maybe time and a place. I don't know. Maybe you're getting some refeeds in there. But at the end of the day, I have been someone that has done 800 calories to get in shape before. And it was the most miserable process, smelling like chlorine every single day of my life, or chloride, because you're just burning yourself to an oblivion. And I would have looked a lot better and gotten a lot leaner a lot quicker. And I just went completely fuzzy.
Yeah, I know, but I could still, it was good. I was making out what you were saying. And yeah, I think that your experience as an athlete also can help influence your results as a coach too, and knowing what's happened. And I have now another hypothetical. If I'm 4 weeks out from a show and I keep saying I don't feel ready, but you believe that I am, what is your response to me?
You need to trust me, because if I say that you're ready, you're going to be ready, because my name's attached to you. There's a lot of coaches that will put athletes on stage, though, just for marketing reasons, to post a stage shot of an athlete to try to get more athletes. And I think that's literally stupid. I hardly even post my athletes, to be honest. Even though I love my athletes and I want to post them all the time. It just, like, I'd rather my pages focus more on educating more than anything else. But my name is attached to you. There's always another show. I'd rather push out the date. And just don't pay your fees. You got a week up until the show to pay your fees, and then pay your fees if you need to. So hold off, but you'll know 4 weeks out if you're going to be ready or not.
Yeah, that was like a hard lesson for me as an athlete where I trusted someone and I always just did exactly what my coach told me. I still do, but I was doing it for someone I probably shouldn't have been doing it for. And I went on stage and I like wish that NPC could like erase those, just erase those two shows that I did. Like, let's just remove those. They're not a positive but like at that point as an athlete, I should have known better. But at the same time, when you're so used to like trusting and doing the thing, you're like, okay, if you think this will be. Now, granted, it got me a national qualification, which is hilarious because there were two people on stage. And this speaks to a video you made
Oh,
too. You can look the best you've ever looked as an athlete and get your worst placing, and the opposite can be true. You can be your worst and you can literally get qualified for nationals.
yeah, Jenna. Yeah, this is about Jenna and Corey. Corey was second place in North Americas and first place in bodybuilding and second place in classic Mr. Pro Card by one place in both classes overall in the bodybuilding comparison, and then one place at North Americas for the classic. And then Jenna was third place at North Americas. And it was a night and day difference for both of them. Night and day. Leanest, best, fullest package they've ever brought. Not even close. And the worst placements. And it
Yeah.
happens, you know? And you know what? A pro card's a pro card. That's all fine and dandy, but those pictures last you forever. That's actually what matters, in my personal opinion. Like, if I was to ever step on stage again, I may not even step on a national stage again. I would just step on stage like, hey, Will Whitman, are you going to be at the show? Gilco, are you going to be at the show? I want some really cool stage shots. Cool. I'm going to step on a local stage and let's take the overall for fun. But I would do it literally for like the stage photos. I wouldn't even do it for like placement or anything like that. I do it because I want to do this for me.
Yeah.
And I think people need to get to the point in their bodybuilding careers where they literally stop listening to the noise. Literally, that noise is noise. It's all noise. It's clout and noise. It's fake. Outside the fitness influencer space gets so convoluted because it's like a cloud of like nothingness that exists. It like, if you look at a cloud, is it affecting your life? No, unless you're getting rained on, maybe. But or you need to get sunlight, but you're still getting some vitamin D through that cloud anyways. Like, does it matter? No. So at the end of the day, I think that that is my word of advice to anyone in the bodybuilding community would be, just do this for you and have a good time along your journey of every aspect of life, and make it a point to have your loved ones be a part of your journey too. The hardest thing is people that have significant others that have never competed or don't compete, and they try to relate to it. It's one reason why I do the post that I do, how many weeks out and how you should be feeling, is because at least you can send it to your loved ones so that they understand how you're actually feeling. Be like, this is literally how I feel right now. Because then they're
Exactly.
actually hearing it from an external source of, oh, do they actually know how that feels? No. Can they sympathize? No. Can they empathize? Probably. You're not looking for sympathy anyways, though. You're looking for empathy. And all that you're trying to do is help them understand how you're feeling at that moment in time as a sense of communication. But do this for you and for the love of the sport, because when you're looking really cool and social media is like, oh my gosh, you look so great, and then all of a sudden you're reversing out of the show and you're like, I feel fat, and like I'm not, my photo is not getting as many likes, and you don't get that dopamine hit anymore. Well, you know what happens? You feel like really depressed and let down, and then you want to do another show. And what are you doing another show for? For the likes and the comments, or are you doing it for yourself? Take the time off and make your physique better. That's what you love doing in the first place. Fall back in love with training, because you probably feel terrible training right now.
Exactly. This speaks so much to your point earlier too about like not going to external sources. Like someone had asked at the seminar, like, well, how do you manage people saying you should do this, you should do that? I was like, well, the more noise you let in, the louder it's gonna get. That's just the way that this is gonna be. So you have to be so mindful about what you're letting in and then what you choose to actually listen to. And then also, like you said, why are you really doing this? If you are doing this, I think even just for the physique, it's already the wrong sport for you because bodybuilding is like, I personally, when I think about bodybuilding for me, I'm like, it's the sport that let me accept that my body's always changing. And I was no longer being bullied in school for it. I'm like, I can just be like how I am and like get better instead. And it was for me. And like, I think I came to this, I used to be in that zone of like, I gotta chase it, I gotta keep going, I gotta keep competing. And now I look back, I'm like, oh, I wish someone would have told me to take like 2 years off and grow. Like, I would have saved so much time and money. Like, would have had more fun. And then now I'm in this zone where I'm like, the goal is to go pro, but the bigger goal is to make an impact. And if I'm doing that in this industry, then that's like my happy pro card day. You know what I'm saying?
Which you already are doing that. And like your reach is pretty big. So I knew who you were as soon as you reached out, because and I was like, oh shoot. I was like, all right, well, I'm pretty sure you're the biggest bikini podcast. I'm not 100% sure, but that's my assumption based off of my perception.
That's
And I
cool.
don't listen to podcasts. It's funny. I don't listen to podcasts. I don't even have time for it. Like actually,
I
like
know.
I'm ADHD, so I'm all over the place. So podcasts I can't listen to. Um the You'll get a kick out of this one. So when I started bodybuilding, which I don't even know if I would have called it bodybuilding, I just liked working out. And I saw Jay Cutler and Ronnie Coleman posing down, and I met a kid in college that I was like, damn, this dude's really good looking. And I'm like, this has been changing my perception on every single person. I was like, I guarantee you he's like a womanizer or douche. Nicest dude I've ever met in my entire life. He had like blonde surfer flowy hair, jacked. And he got me into bodybuilding. We used to have like tuna sandwich time every single midnight. Like we were
Oh,
so bro, but and nicest person ever. And like literally, like, I never judged a book by cover ever again my entire life. First semester in college. And my goal was to lose my abs. I had like a 6 or 8 pack. I had a 6 pack when I was like in seventh grade when I was playing soccer. And I had an 8 pack when I was like 14 years old or 15 years old. But I was always like 135 pounds. My
right.
goal was to lose my abs. No joke. That was my first goal. I was like, I'm just
That's
gonna eat as
wild.
much as I can. And I was a freak. I was eating like 8 to 10,000 calories a day, every single day, day in and day out. The running joke that I had in college was I was on the toilet more than I was in class. And it was probably pretty accurate statement. Sadly enough, I probably couldn't afford toilet paper, so it was probably paper towel by the end. But either here nor there. Way TMI for the
I'm
podcast.
glad we got that detail in there.
Exactly. Broke college days. And so never lost my abs, but I got up to 220 pounds naturally in 3 years, from 135 pounds to almost 100 pounds. And, you know, I loved going to the gym and lifting and beating my numbers every single week. I didn't do it for a physique goal. I did it because I loved it. I did it because I was depressed. I did it because it was my anti-numbness and anti-drug. That's where I took out all the pain in my life because I was going through a lot of stuff at that period of time, and helped me develop into the person I was today. A lot of people say bodybuilding saved my life. Bodybuilding was my anti-drug. Everyone that I knew around me was becoming drug addicts, and I was the only one that wasn't drinking alcohol and partying all the time. And also, I will say that going from how I looked at 135 pounds to like how I looked later on, and how people treated me differently, I was already an introvert. People think I'm an extrovert. I'm not. I'm very much an introvert. Um, I shied myself away from the world even more because I saw how people treated people differently based off of physical appearance. Now I know over time and as I've aged and matured that physical looks do matter to an extent, and it has to do with the perception of work ethic involved. I just don't like people getting put up on a pedestal for how someone looks.
Mm.
I love the work ethic, and the most successful people I have personally met have also been in the gym or working out or taking care of themselves. Why? Because they understand that the body and the mind and the soul, it all goes together. And that's an important thing to me. But the actual physical blanket appearance of just a look means absolutely nothing. And that's why I actually stopped talking to people for a long period of time and introverted myself even further, where I wouldn't even leave my house. Not a complete recluse, obviously. Like I was bouncing and stuff like that, to help pay my way through school. But I was bouncing like 30 to 40 hours a week. But
I feel like that's like a prerequisite for bodybuilders. They're like for male bodybuilders. I always hear that they're like bouncing and working a job and going to school.
should have been a bartender. I would pick the wrong job. I was broke. And like they were walking away with a few $100 a night, and I was getting paid like 40 or $45 a night. I was like, I picked the wrong gig. Um, so but that definitely molded me. And you were talking about working long hours. I was conditioned to working 80 to 100 hours a week, and that actually transpired into me building my business up and
Mhm.
everything like that. And people still think that I have it good. I spend everything that I can back to give back to people. Like it's not like that. In fact, owning a business is way more expensive than being an employee somewhere else. Like I was making way more money when I was working for
Thank
someone
you.
else.
Yeah.
Always have, always will. I just love what I do, but I love the ability to be able to use the business to continue to reach more people like what you're doing. The whole key is to reach as many people, to help as many people out there as we can. But here's the thing is, if you're doing it for all the right reasons, word of mouth spreads that you're a genuinely good person that's there to help people. Or, that's the best form of business. People are like, how did you do so well in business? Well, I worked for like 7 to 8 years without people even knowing my name. And I executed, and people kind of started figuring out who I
Mhm.
was. And there was a post that people related to, and that I kept doing posts similar to that people related to, and it helped people out. So if it's helping people, it's doing something that's genuine, and it's genuinely who I am. So
Yeah, I can definitely tell. Like sometimes I worry that I'm going to interview someone who makes a lot of informational posts and has a lot of great things to say online, and then when it comes to like talking about it, they can't. So I'm really pleasant. Not that I wasn't expecting you to be able to, because I knew you could based on your videos, but you know how it is. Sometimes it's like, oh, I should ask you about this. So I appreciate everything that you've shared, even from the personal perspectives of life that you've experienced and your outlook on things, your passion, and your viewpoints, as well as the advice that you shared. I feel like me and you could talk forever. Like there's a million things I could probably think of continuously to ask you about, but is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to make sure to share and feel really good about this?
so this is to the bikini crowd. So I just want to shout out to y'all. Um, you guys can go really far naturally in the sport. If there's one thing I had to caution you guys about, enhancement at top levels, it comes into play for sure. Even if it can be very low amounts, and there's ways to do it very intelligently. Just make sure that you have the right advice and the right guidance along the way. And losing your menstrual cycle is not normal. You should definitely have a menstrual cycle of some sort, and I would highly recommend finding the right medical supervision to oversight you. Most of these clinics are not good. In fact, well, I guess this is going to be my first announcement. I'm launching my clinic here within the next few weeks. It's honestly because the more of the medical side of it for women, I just am not okay with what has been happening within the space. TRT is being pushed. There are natural remedies to a lot of this stuff. There's bioidentical hormones that are way more important than just testosterone. In fact, there's different forms of testosterone that people don't even talk about, like nasal testosterone and stuff like that. Have way lower side effects, and I'll give you most of the benefits that a woman is looking to get, like a libido boost and stuff like that. Um, that can handle like gut protocols, antibiotics, and like true customized healthcare. I don't like the medical system, the way that it's structured with insurance. Insurance ends up costing you way more. Like you pay more for insurance in a year than you have to pay. Like you're paying usually 4 times more just for the insurance cost of having insurance than you
Exactly.
would for customized healthcare for yourself. So my goal is to kind of like flip the entire industry upside down on SPACs. So you can basically pay for a Costco membership and get whatever you need. Um,
This
yeah.
is a clinic in Atlanta.
So it's actually going to be virtually and online first because we will have more licenses throughout the nation, and then we'll launch the physical clinic probably by the end of the year, is what
That's
my end goal is.
amazing. That's amazing. Well, congrats on that. How are you even going about that? I mean, what's going to be different, or what are you trying to disrupt that you think will be beneficial for not just this niche but others?
That's funny. You said disrupt. I feel like I'm a big disruptor for a long period of time.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm not a huge fan of the HRT world and how it's been getting pushed. I think there's better ways to utilize hormone replacement therapy. Longevity, I feel like, is being viewed incorrectly. Um, Drugs, peptides, all these different things are being way upcharged. It's basically like legal drug dealers, a lot of these clinics. There's ways to sell that stuff at cost. In fact, it's very cheap. There's a very cool resource, and I'm just going to give Mark Cuban a huge shout out here from Shark Tank. His website is way cheaper than GoodRx.
Hmm.
Your scripts are way cheaper if you know the right resources, and people do not have the knowledge or the right resources to get drugs cheaper. Insulin is very cheap, and people think it's a few $100s for a pen. You can go into Walmart and buy insulin for $25, 1,000 IUs. So there are ways, and there's just a lack of knowledge within the medical world and the way that the medical system works because of how things are structured, where I want to work corporate jobs so I can have benefits. What people don't realize is they're losing money on their salary to get benefits that they're losing money on benefits. And the benefits are actually a massive reduction in not only salary, but their own pay that they're wasting money on. Why not do preventative health care, make people be healthy as long as you can, give them some type of acute care system, and then if you need a hospital system, you have a hospital system. And that's the way that it's supposed to be, is preventative healthcare, which has not been done. And the customization is so cookie cut nowadays. If you're a male, you walk into a clinic and you get testosterone replacement therapy, and then you get an Arimidex. Yes, you get a breast cancer drug with your testosterone replacement therapy. Have a good day. You'll come back for a blood dump eventually. Why do you need to do a blood dump if you're doing things properly? Like there are so many things that are just incorrect that I have had to do for longevity. There are gray areas within the FDA that are still loopholes within the system, which are really cool. That's one reason why I actually don't want to go back for a medical degree is I'm allowed to talk for
Exactly.
entertainment purposes still on a lot of the things that doctors can't talk about.
Mhm.
They're like I was talking about BPC 157 over a decade ago before people even knew. I literally used BPC 157 when only pro athletes knew it and doctors were giving it to them. And now all of a sudden there's a ban against certain peptides, and actually has to do with actually sourcing. I had to do a video on it. I've literally read the entire document on it. Even though I don't have a law degree or anything like that, I was able to read through it enough. So it's super interesting. Uh, what we have available to us in market and what is being publicized for, let's use semaglutide, for example. All of a sudden, it's a miracle drug for weight loss. All of a sudden, people are having bone issues and thyroid issues and hairs falling out and all this stuff. It's like, well, they can hardly drink water because they feel full at all times because your medical dosings are, from what I've seen in relativity, 20 times higher than what is actually needed. So why don't you guys just take a step back and stop prescribing as many drugs and just utilize it for something that could be utilized in a healthy manner? Because it's an amazing peptide if utilized properly. So these are like all things that I've been able to see in relative experience and practical experience, as well as medical studies um, that aren't being talked about.
Man, I have so much respect for everything you just said. Like, there are so, like, similarly to you, you don't want to go to the medical field and get a medical degree. Just like I decided not to pursue licensure from a counseling board that I don't necessarily even agree with their ethics. You know what I'm saying? So it's like people are like, "Oh, are you like can I introduce you as a psychologist or a licensed counselor?" I'm like, "No." But you can introduce me as a mental health professional with her national certification in counseling. I got all the education, but I'm running a business here that I think is making more of an impact than what I would be doing with that. You know what I'm saying? So I appreciate what you said. And then I also really like how you mentioned the way that insurance works. As an athlete, it's really difficult too, because I'm very healthy and yet I'm paying $315 a month at least just to so that if I were to get hurt, I'd be taken care of. When that should, I personally agree, that should be a separate system. And if I go to get my well woman check, nothing about it is being a well woman. If you have a problem, you're now being charged on top of that. So you're really only going to be told, yeah, stamp of approval, you're healthy. Or they're like, oh, well, blood work's included. And then you get hit with the bill and you realize it wasn't included because the doctor reported what reason it was for. And now all of a sudden, you're being hit with that. So most of us athletes, I think we actually turn to private clinics or options because we don't need or we don't want to jump through I mean, I had to jump through so many hoops just to get something I needed for SIBO treatment.
Oh yeah.
And it was because, oh, your insurance company like doesn't recognize it as that. I'm like, I had a positive H. pylori test, which most of Americans do, like you said earlier. No one's dying, but it is very its thing. And then like SIBO, it was like, well, we don't recognize that. I'm like, it's affecting all of this. And yet I had to go through like a Canadian
Yep.
pharmacy just to get what I needed.
Yeah, you're talking about rifaximin.
Yeah,
So, well, I guess it would be X-Men because that's a generic form. We don't have a generic in the US, so it's a $2,000 antibiotic.
exactly.
There's loopholes in the system to get it. So,
Right. But I didn't know about those
no.
until, of course, I got disapproved. And then the doctor was like, well, I'll try to say this to them. And then they were like, well, no, because this was already written. It's like, so I had to pretend I had traveler's diarrhea to get
Yep,
that.
that's correct.
But it was like I could have said I just went on a trip, and now why didn't you do that from the beginning? Like SIBO is worse than that.
Well, Traveler's diarrhea, the diagnosis on it is actually only a 3-day treatment for rifaximin, actually. So technically in the US, it's only 3 days. But you need
Interesting.
usually between 14 to up to 21 days. It just depends. And you better hit it hard, pretty hard, fast. And there's also a natural process you have to go through to make sure that you can actually break down into the actual bacteria to break down the biofilm to as well. So there's actually a priming factor before you even hit antibiotics, which in the medical industry, they don't do it because it's natural. Um,
And
and
then people
yeah,
end up relapsing with it because it keeps them sick.
yep, yeah. So I knew someone that had Lyme disease, the plague, H. pylori, and SIBO, and it took it was 6 rounds of antibiotics, 12 weeks of antibiotics to eventually get rid of it. And she was lucky that she had me as a connection and her aunt as a connection directly in the medical community so that we could get things scripted. But you're basically becoming antibiotic resistant. So you're having to run different strains of antibiotics and roll them in and out to kill stuff off.
Well, and then like I can only imagine how much money that is. I mean, it's just for the natural route to prepare. I felt like I spent so much money, and then to actually take the antibiotic. I mean, I got a good deal, but I had to wait forever, and then you're priming with, and then the actual medical bills to try to get it through insurance.
Yep.
It's expensive.
Yeah, and GI mapping isn't accepted by the medical community, and it may never. We'll
Exactly.
see. We'll see because it's they only accept the breath test right now. I think there might be one other test they're doing, but it's predominantly only the breath test, and it's only a flag, yes or no. That's the issue that I have with it.
Exactly.
Is it's a flag. So now H. pylori, though, the issue with H. pylori is protective actually against things like Crohn's disease. H. pylori is really good for us, but it's also can cause stomach cancer if it's active. So that's where like a breath test is actually technically more accurate than actually getting the strain read because you can see if there's active rings or not. So yeah, there's just like there's a little bit of context needed there for people, and
That's good
it's a
context.
rabbit hole in itself.
Yeah, that was really good context. So I'm glad that you shared that and how it can go in so many directions. And like you can go to a nurse practitioner or someone who does practice and they can say, I believe in this, but it doesn't matter if you're going to them and you're running it through any sort of insurance, like you still won't get to treatment. So you can have someone who advocates for you, but it doesn't usually make it that far. So I think that's really cool. And congrats on doing that. I think that's amazing. And I can't wait to hear and see more about that. And I'm grateful for your time. I would like to dive into one more subject, but I'm like, I don't know if I'm taking too much of your time.
Let's do it. I've got 7 minutes for our next call.
Perfect, because it won't take much, and I literally have the same amount of time before mine. So, fertility. I didn't get to ask you about fertility, and I feel like it's so important. It affects females and males in the sport. I think females who date bodybuilders or competitors are worried, and then also females who compete and maybe are enhanced or not are worried about it. So let's have you talk about that.
Yeah, I kind of want to blow the cap off of it right off the rip. So fertility is going to be predominantly genetically based. So you're going to be born infertile or fertile. And this is really hard for people to hear. And infertility rates is about a 10% of the populace, male and female. In fact, I believe that fertility rates on males are actually infertility rates are higher than women, so by about 3% or 4% when I was doing my research, as far as like statistically speaking goes, and
That's what
statistics
I've
are
heard.
just numbers. So when it comes to the bodybuilding space, things that I wish I knew is I wish I stayed on HCG when I started testosterone replacement therapy or started running cycles, not just PCTs. Post-cycle therapies, I don't really think are super useful. In fact, from a mental cognition standpoint, yes, but from the medical research I've actually done is post-cycle therapies, it helps with more the mental standpoint than the actual physical standpoint of helping with rebooting your testicles. Um, so from a testicle health standpoint, it's mainly based off of how many steroids you're running and the duration of time, whether or not you're going to come back online or not. And here's the thing, you're going to come back online or you're not going to come back online. And that may take a year to come back online. You're at the big man's mercy at that point. Hopefully you come back online if you're coming off of stuff. For me, living the stressful life and the long hours I work, I'm staying on TRT forever, but I'm also staying on HCG indefinitely. And then when I want to get fertile, I will add some FSH into the mix so I produce more sperm.
Hmm.
HCG is biological or bioidentical luteinizing hormone, which is going to produce semen, and then sperm will be FSH. Things that really people aren't talking about. So I have a protocol that I learned from the doctor, and I modified it from there to get my sperm count up. In fact, I wasn't able to run a sperm test before I even got her pregnant. I got her pregnant in one shot coming out of a show. And like we were not expecting it, but I was like, you're pregnant. Like within 2 weeks, I was like, you're pregnant. And she missed her period, and she didn't miss her period the entire prep. And all of a sudden, like I was like, she skipped her period. I was like, that's weird. And then we ran her hormone panel, and her hormones were higher than they normally were. And I'm like, you're pregnant for sure. And then all of a sudden, her doctor, she was about to get an X-ray for a chiropractor, and he's like, before you get the X-ray, I think you're pregnant. Go take a test. And then she turned out she was pregnant. She was expecting some like emotional response from me, and then she handed me it, and I was like, I told you were pregnant.
You're like, logically, I saw this coming a long time ago.
You know, it's like you've been emotional, girl. No, it's
Yeah.
fine. Um, so either way, it was actually like it
Oh,
had to do with like indigestion. Actually, is how I knew she was pregnant more than anything else. Yeah, she thought she had bacterial overgrowth, and I was like, it's like I think you're pregnant. So
interesting.
either way, that was one thing. Now, when it comes to women, maintaining a menstrual cycle to the best of your ability is extremely important, mainly around when you're trying to get pregnant. And the reason being is when you have a good, healthy menstrual cycle, it means that you have enough progesterone as well as estrogen that your egg is healthy and fertile. So if you're estrogen dominant, you're usually going to have low progesterone levels and then high prolactin levels. And prolactin is inhibiting of certain hormones. So what happens when you're going through a menstrual cycle is your estrogen's high, your estrogen comes back down, It allows for the release of the egg because gonadotropin releasing, well, not the luteinizing hormone FSH start to rise, and that allows for the egg to release. And then that's when you have to fertilize the egg, and then you either get pregnant or you don't get pregnant, and then you basically shed your uterine walls and it gets ready again. And then progesterone levels rise after your ovulation window. They come back down, estrogen levels come back up. That's essentially it's basically like a teeter-totter is how I explain women's hormones.
Hmm.
Where you want it is you want it balancing in the middle. But if you have someone that weighs too much on one side, then it just sits up in the air. So usually this is going to be estrogen. Estrogen is going to be really high, and your progesterone is going to be sitting on the ground. And that's not where you want it. You need your progesterone level to come back up, and then estrogen starts to balance and it starts teeter-totter back and forth. And then in the middle is that ovulation window of time. So you just want that thing teeter-tottering a little bit. And every woman is going to be a little bit different, where some women need higher estrogen, some women need higher progesterone. It's no perfect number. I know people try to put things into perfect world scenarios. You just need it bouncing back and forth.
Is there something that males should test for and then females should test for if they are trying to get pregnant, like that they should look out for?
So I would get a full hormone panel, but like if you're trying to see if you're actually having enough luteinizing hormone FSH releasing as a woman, you want to get that tested during your ovulation window. But I like my women getting tested on days 20 or 21 of their cycle to see how high their progesterone levels are, because that's usually going to dictate whether or not they're going to be inhibiting like a luteinizing hormone FSH from releasing from having a good fertile egg. Because that will affect gonadotropin releasing hormone, which affects the cascade of the hormones from that point on. And then when it comes to men, if you want to make sure your HCG is real, get your luteinizing hormone tested, and that'll tell you if your HCG is real or not. And then FSH, you're going to have to get scripted from your doctor anyways, so it's not like you're getting underground FSH. It's usually used with women in fertility treatments, not men. There's also some clomiphene protocols and stuff like that. I actually posted like a bunch of medical protocols to my YouTube channel a while back. Well, not a while back, not too long ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much where I'd keep it. If you're coming off of testosterone, just make sure that your luteinizing hormone, your FSH, is high enough. I would also get tested and bring down your testosterone levels to see if you can naturally produce a little bit of luteinizing hormone, because steroids will still affect the genes of the sperm, so the efficacy of the sperm. So you don't want to be running a full-blown cycle. Will it make it like the results bad? I don't know. It just can. So even something like an L-carnitine can help with sperm motility and stuff like that. So with women, taurine is really good for the efficacy of the egg as well.
Okay, one last thing. If a man, you said that they might need to come off testosterone. Do they need to come off testosterone in
No,
order?
I would just reduce down testosterone. Usually around the 80 to 100 milligram per week marker is where men are producing some amount of luteinizing hormone naturally, usually. I was actually at 150 milligrams and I was producing some amount of luteinizing hormone, which is very uncommon. Like most guys aren't going to be there. Most guys are going to be around 100. And then if they're doing like a clomiphene protocol, they'd want to be at 100. They can't really be above that because they have to be producing some amount of luteinizing hormone, and testicles have to be functioning to some extent.
You're doing the Lord's work out here. You're getting people pregnant. You're helping people have babies. You're getting people medical care they need. That's awesome. Well, I'm just so happy for everything that you shared and for taking so much time with me today. Like literally we've been on since 11 and it's 2:32. So it's been awesome to connect with you. And how can people work with you and learn from you?
Yeah, so learning from me, my YouTube channel until I like launch. I may do a Patreon page where I go a little bit more detailed than I am on my YouTube channel, but I really want to continue giving out free information. So any support over there is awesome. And then Dynamite D is my Instagram page, and I have a link there to demesquitanutrition.com where you can put in an application.
Awesome. And that'll be in the show notes page. That's on celestial.bit/podcast. So all of that will be linked there. And I appreciate you guys tuning in for as long as you did. Tag us, let us know what your main takeaways were, or maybe some follow-up questions so he can make more videos about it, because this man is producing videos all the time. Like he said, he's really educational, and I hope you guys check out more of his stuff, and appreciate you all listening. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day, night, or morning, wherever you are in the world while you're listening to this episode.